TikTok, it's time to rock. Welcome to the channel, folks. Welcome to a long overdue, rescheduled 3-time Van Halen show, Johnny.
Yeah, there it is. Here we are. Live in front of your naked, steaming ears or whatever.
Yeah.
What Roth used to say.
Good to see you, boys. Thank you for being patient with me over the last couple of weeks. We've got a few things, obviously, that we want to talk about, folks. If you're watching on a replay and if you're going to be joining us live, it's a pleasure, and we welcome you. We've got Bo Cephas, also known as Tanner Jordan, in the chat. Good to see you, brother.
Good to see you. Glad to be back.
Fantastic. We've got a few things. That we want to talk to you about. Kyle, how are you, brother? Kyle's got no audio. So, Kyle, can you hear us? Okay. So I'm going to put a message then, and he needs to probably jump out and jump back on again. Hold on. Kyle, leave the chat. Leave the stream and reconnect. Hold on, guys. Will he see? Can you see that, Kyle? Okay. Sign language, Tanner. Oh, yeah. Good to see you guys. So obviously, we've got a couple of things that we want to talk about. Sorry about that technical issue, folks. It happens. It's one of the great things, John, on live YouTube streaming. We've encountered this before, and it will always be an issue going ahead in the future, isn't it?
You know it. Technology is great when it works.
Yeah. It's fantastic. Hey, guys, like I said to you, we had this scheduled 3 or 4 weeks ago for us to get together. I was especially interested, though, to get together and have a chat to Tanner about this drumming journey that he's been on, John. You know, so I look forward to talking to him about that, and we'll include links to Tanner's social media accounts for you to go and watch. We can't, unfortunately, play that here because we'll probably get copyrighted. We probably will. So it's one of those interesting things that StreamYards and YouTube allow some channels to do and some channels not to do. We won't push it because we never seem to have enough or good luck, John, doing that.
That's right.
We've got our very good friend Alan in the chat. Good to see you, brother.
Hey, Alan.
Alan.
Yeah, he's in the chat. Hey, guys, so before we start talking about Van Halen and a couple of things that we've got planned, a lot of you that are watching on a replay and a lot of you will be familiar with Fruitcake Tony and Halenville. So I got told a couple of days ago, guys, that the weekly Halenville show that Fruitcake Tony was doing is now gone to a show where they're going to broadcast like us, I suppose, too, Johnny and Tanner, when news kind of comes out from the Van Halen community, because, you know, doing a Van Halen show weekly these days isn't an easy thing to do, John.
Very tough. Very tough. Being as there is no more Van Halen. It's very tough.
Yeah. Kyle, can you hear us, brother?
I can hear you now. My bad.
There we go.
Fantastic. And good to have you on. So we're going to introduce you, Kyle. I'm sure a lot of people that are going to be watching on replay and that may join us later will be familiar with you because you've been posting Van Halen guitar gear wet, dry, wet videos on your YouTube channel. I'll include that while we're talking if people want to go and follow you. So just give me a couple of seconds, folks. I'll include Kyle's channel and his Instagram account. But yeah, we'd been talking about getting you on for a while. I think we connected a while ago, and it's just one of those things. Life gets in the way, and sometimes you just can't sort of sort it out. But we managed to get you on, bro. So thank you for jumping on.
No, like I said, I appreciate you guys having me. I mean, I've been watching your all show for a long time. So I'm amazed that you guys even know who I am. Or I mean, also, I'm super flattered, super humble. So like I said, I appreciate your time. And like, I know you're in New Zealand and this and that, which I hope to go to someday. That's on my bucket list. But I'll definitely have to look you up if I'm ever in the neck of the woods over there. But yeah, no, I know things get in the way, so it's not a problem at all. You know, life happens to us all, so not a big deal at all.
No, I appreciate it, bro. I appreciate it because that's one of the things that we like to do here, John and Tanner, on our community. You know, there's a lot of, well, there's a few other channels that talk about Van Halen. And
we're the best one, though. No.
and we're just a part of the YouTube world that is just offering our contribution to that great legacy of Van Halen, you know, of touching with other people and sharing that experience. Mm-hmm. And you know, I don't want to sound like a softie or a liberal or anything like that, but just keeping it positive too, Kyle. You know what I mean? You know, because in the Van Halen community, I'm sure a lot of us are members of other musical communities, but it's a fact. The Van Halen community, boy, it has some strong toxicity sometimes.
Definitely some strong opinions.
Almost as much as the Bavarian cheese whistle group that Tanner's in, right, Tanner?
Yeah.
What
type of cheese?
They fight over what type of cheese, right? Kyle, where are you located?
I'm in Las Vegas. I've been out here now for 10 years, but I'm originally from Indiana. But yeah, I've been in Vegas for 10 years now.
No kidding.
Sweet.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I'm only one state away from moving as far away as possible.
When you fall into the ocean.
Yeah. And that whole state's going under anyway, so.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Well, you headed the right way. It's warmer there and nicer.
Yeah, it's super hot here right now, man. I've lived here 10 years, and no matter how hot it gets, I still say the same thing every year. I'm like, it's so hot outside. Like, I'm surprised, but you'd think I'd be used to it by now, but
yeah.
Wow.
It's still too hot.
Wow.
We got a break today.
Kyle, what we like to do, you know, we're going to be live for a couple of hours, but what we like to do when people come on that are new to the channel, we all have a story when it comes to Van Halen, and one of the reasons why we like to have people come on that haven't been on before is to tell us their story of how they discovered this band that unites us all. So give us the Kyle Broughton Van Halen story, Kyle.
Yeah, sure. So I started playing guitar when I was 16. So I'm 34 now, so a while ago. But I mean, Van Halen had already been around for some time, come the time I was 16. So I just started playing guitar, and one of my buddies was giving me a ride to school. And he was like, "Hey, you picked up guitar recently, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure did." He goes, "You ever heard of Eddie Van Halen?" And I was just like, "I have. What's an Eddie Van Halen?" And he was just like, "Oh." He's like, "Wait a minute." He goes, "Grab my CD." And of course, you know, CDs were big time still at that time. And it was the best of both worlds CD. And I saw the paint job on the front of that CD, and I was like, that looks so familiar. I know I've seen it somewhere. I can't put my finger on it. I was like, but I feel like I'm gonna know this. And then obviously the first song he played was Eruption, and then my head basically caved in. I think I suffered my first stroke, and I didn't know what to think afterwards. And I was like, is that it? Like, when it was over, and he was like, "What do you mean? Is that it?" And I was like, "What was that?" And he was just like, "Man," he's like, that was all guitar." I was like, "No way." I was like, "There's no way that's guitar." I was like, "That had to be like double tracked or something." He was like, "No, man." He's like, "That's Eddie Van Halen." And then I was like, from that point on, when I started playing, I learned like my first couple chords, like a G chord, D, A. Thought I was super super cool. And then from that point, I was like, man, if I can play this song called Eruption, I was like, then there's no excuse for me not to be able to play anything. It still took me a lot of years to build up to that, but it was on my bucket list from that point on. And then as I went in from Eruption, I started listening. The first version of Van Halen I got into actually was the Hagar era, and I didn't even realize that there was any other era from that point on until I bought the Best of Both Worlds CD, and then I started realizing, I was like, wait a minute, I was like, the guitar tones are different, and I was like, and I feel like it's a different singer, and then I just started going down the rabbit hole, and I was like, oh, now there's David Lee Roth, and there's this guy, Sammy Hagar, and I was like, but Michael Anthony was around the whole time, his brother Alex was around the whole time, and learned their backstory, and then, music for me back then, I was never really big on music either. My family's kind of been into music, but nothing huge, nothing professional, nothing like that, all hobbies. And I can honestly say, today, I never pictured myself playing guitar, or caring about guitar, or even. I'm not a how would you say, habitual person. I don't really have an addictive personality. But man, from that day on, I mean, it was Van Halen from that point on. I can't explain it, but it's just, and I know that's something that's happened to us all. I feel like everyone's stories, different but yet similar, because it all brings back to the same thing. And again, I love all Van Halen. I love all members of it, but obviously, for myself as well as many others, it was Eddie was the one that really drew you into it, because I was like, I remember even going to I used to live in LA for a year, and there's a Guitar Center there off Sunset Boulevard. And they have like the whole handprints like you do on the Walk of Fame. And I remember they had a handprints in there, I think it was from 1985, and it was Eddie Van Halen's hand. And the first thing I did was put my hand in that mold. And I was like, I got to know, are our hands the same size? Or is he like gigantic like Steve Vai? Like, I got to know. I'm like, because there's some stuff I can't do. And I'm like, there's no reason. If my hands are the same size, I shouldn't be able to do what he's doing. And then surely enough, our hand was roughly the same size, at least on that day, back in 1985, I guess. And so I was like, oh, there's hope. There's no excuse anymore.
I think a lot of us have made that pilgrimage to the Guitar Center on Sunset, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, they used to have the whole, his whole rig out there for a portion of time too. Back with, I think it was his 2007 Relic, or his Frankenstein was out there. And
I actually met him in the parking lot there.
Right there. It's right out in front. Yeah, and then they had Alex's drum set, his black and white one. They had that one there for a long time too when I was there.
I met him in the parking lot behind the building.
What?
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Yeah, and like 1992, January of 1992, they were putting great people's handprints in that day. Ted McCarty, Gibson, I mean the legend. That guy, I think he designed the Flying V in the Explorer, the shapes. I mean, he was like, he was the president of Gibson, and so he was very old at that point. He was there, but Eddie was there because Ernie Ball was getting his handprints put in there. So Eddie was there, and he was with Sterling Ball. And I would just, after the ceremony, Eddie was like a few feet away from me during the ceremony, and I got a bunch of great pictures. A lot of people steal them. You see them on the, he's like waving, and that was me like an idiot yelling, "Hey, Ed." He was like 2 people away from me, and he kept leaning forward thinking like that. We got pictures, and then my camcorder, the battery died. So they went inside to do, photos in there with Albert Lee, and who else was with Eddie there that day? Trying to remember who else was in there, but there was a bunch of people there, and Tracy Guns from LA Guns. I remember seeing he was there, and so I went around the parking lot to put the camera in the car, and sure enough, Eddie and Biff Sterling Ball came walking out the back door, and there's nobody there. It was just the 3 of us. Ironically, it was like where that mural is now. It was like right near there, and he was great. He was cool as you'd expect him to be. Nice as could be, cool as could be. It was just a short, tell you, "Oh man, I love you," like that kind of shake hands, and then they got in the car. But then my friend happened to come, who was with me, around the back of the building to the car, and I said, "Come here quick." And Eddie actually rolled down the window. He was in the passenger seat of Biff Ball's car, and he reached out and he shook my hand again, and then he left, and was like, "Wow, that was like the greatest thing, ever."
That is sick. That's super cool, man. That's a really cool story.
Yeah, it was neat.
You said that was back in 1992?
92. Yeah, it was like we were there for NAMM. It was like January 16th, 92. And
Wow.
yeah, there's I mean, I got a bunch of pictures from it. The Guitar Center, I don't know. Oh, they were also putting the guy from Ovation, Bill Command, the guy, the roundback acoustic guitars.
Yep.
He was getting put in the rock. You know, they're doing his handprints too. The only ones that are out there now are the rock star guys of it. But I don't even think Ted McCarty might be out there because he was real important guy. They may be out there, but they're not in like the center where like you're saying. And it's amazing how big Steve Vai's hands are. It's insane, man. How big
he was the only person on his left hand had a 6 finger.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
I was like, that's genius.
I noticed that. I noticed Jeff Beck's hands weren't that big. And everybody thinks Eddie wasn't a big guy, but that ice cream man stretch and stuff like that. It's like I know a lot of people that can't do it. You know what I mean? And his hands weren't huge. They were, like you said, I put my hand in there about the same size as mine, and
they weren't huge, but his pink, like you could always tell, like his hand was more splayed than most, like
right, exactly. Like wider. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that guy had a lot of dexterity to get some of those stretches. I was just like, how do you get to this point? I'm like,
yeah.
His fingers literally have to have 6-packs on them individually.
I appreciate that more and more now, because I think when he was using the plexi back then, and I think he really had to work hard to, and he even said when he switched to these high gain stuff, he's like, I didn't want to work as hard. It was, it's much easier, on that stuff. And I guess he didn't want to work as hard anymore as he was getting older. He's like, but I really think he manhandled the guitar, because I mean, it didn't have any real gain. I mean, you play through one of those amps and you're like, oh my gosh, this is not, it's not fun. It's not, it's not what you expect. It's like, you really got to kind of squeeze that out of there. And I really believe that he had really strong left hand. I mean, both hands are just like incredibly strong to do what he did with that, in those early years.
Especially especially like what you hear from like stories of, or at least even just looking at pictures like that, the 78, like Frankenstein, like, I mean, it had flat, like that and the Shark both had like flat, like basically fretless Wonder frets on them. And,
right.
And like, thinking, I mean, I know that Ed used 9 to 40 strings throughout his entire career, but I like using a 40 on the bottom still, to me, is like, how can you do On Fire with a 40 gauge string on the bottom? I always get at least 42. Is like thinking about like the trouble he went through and experimentation to get to where it was on the first album. Like it must have just been a miracle to get
and to your point,
sound out of it.
And to your point, I mean, I don't think his guitars were set up like, I don't think he was a pro at setting his guitars up. I think it was just kind of like, you could tell, even like Ted Templeman tells the story of like, Eddie came over to his apartment a couple of years ago, this was, and to see him, I guess this is after Eddie was even sick, and Ted had a guitar laying on a stand there, and the whole thing was whacked. And Eddie's like, what is this? He's like, give me a screwdriver. And he like kind of like rigged it with this screwdriver to, the action. So it was very playable. And I guess Ted was just amazed, like, and I've always heard like, Hagar used to say, I don't know how he does that, because I remember one article, he said the strings are like, half inch off the neck. The action's not even like low, you'd expect it to be really low. And then I remember John Shanks said during the recording of A Different Kind of Truth, the same thing, the guitar was not set. It was like he even said, do you want me to have somebody set it up for you? And he's like, no, it's all right. And apparently it was like the action was way off on the stealth black Wolfgang. It was just very high. And
I noticed that when I was at the EVH con, like playing all of your guys' 5150s, I was like especially since you guys have like actually accurate parts, mine just has like Floyd Special on it and stuff. And what I noticed about mine versus like yours, the Floyd Specials come with like a crazy steep angle, which I gotten used to. So using like your 5150 at the con towards the end of the night, I remember like feeling like your start angle was like here, and I was like, how the heck do I even dive it enough to? And it was just like, and like all of your actions were so low, and I was like, man, what am I doing wrong?
I actually think this is pretty high. This is a period correct. This is from Mr. McGuire there in Vegas.
It might have been Joe. Did Joe bring his?
Yeah, I think Joe's was there too.
I think I used his actually.
But mine has a lot of like wiggle to it.
Yeah.
I'm just so used to it. I don't know why, but it's like it's got a lot. It's very loose up in like here before it engages. But I think they told me that the FRT5 and stuff like that, the bars were originally like more like this, believe it or not, which is harder. You know, I'm used to it now, but it seems a little bit high, like angled up. You know, but
wow, I
always think the action could be lower anyway, Tanner. You know what I mean? It's like I always think it's high. You know, so I don't know. I have this one tuned to A440 too, and it's like, I don't know. I'm used to it now too. It plays pretty well, believe it or not. But it's like, you know, I'm just maybe because I'm getting older, just like low action. I like it to be the bends to be nice and easy. That G string, I want that thing to,
yeah.
But, you know, but you know what it is like everybody here, you adjust to whatever guitar you're playing. So if you're like you love a certain guitar, it could play like terribly, but if you just keep playing it for a couple hours, you're completely used to it at that point. You know what I mean? And I think that's probably what Eddie did too. He was just so used to.
Well, the quirks.
Pick it up and be like, oh,
the quirks of the guitar. Like I can guarantee you, if someone was to take like Ed 78 Frankenstein back in the day and like abuse it the way he did, like I bet you they wouldn't have kept it in tune. Like it wasn't just a matter of setup. You know, like there are tricks. I mean, I've had guitars without Floyds and stuff like that where it's like I can keep it in tune, but like when I give it to my friends, I'm like immediately they're out of tune, and I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. Like you got to get used to like just the finesse of diving it perfectly, and it's kind of funny how that works.
Yeah, Alan says he did his own fretwork in the old days, and his guitars were set up to very exacting intonation standards. The evidence in interviews show this to be true, although they say that I guess when the Floyd was drilled on the Frankenstein, the intonation was off, and it was always off for the whole time he used that. I think it was Tom Anderson supposedly plugged and re-drilled the holes on the Frankenstein. I don't know, like in mid 80s or something like that, after the guitar was long retired. So I remember reading somewhere saying the same thing about Jeff Beck. They said Jeff Beck's guitars, the intonation was like off, but it didn't matter. These guys could just, you know, they know like how to just.
My Strat, I just actually upgraded my one Strat to have like the 2-point floating tremolo, locking tuners, and roller nut, like just Jeff Beck style, pretty much for that exact reason. And I noticed that same thing, despite the fact that it stays in tune really well with good lubrication, it goes out of tune. But when you play Jeff Beck stuff, it doesn't ever sound out of tune, because especially with his like tremolo stuff, like when you're always using vibrato, you don't have to be in tune anymore.
Right.
And I think even like that's kind of similar to like when you add a harmonizer to it. Like I've heard Alan, talk to me and say like, finding the tunings of the heavy harmonizer stuff is a little bit harder, because it's like obviously you're working in a range. You hear some extra kind of over and undertones that aren't the primary, and which kind of masks. Whenever I play with and without a harmonizer, I'm like, oh man, I like the harmonizer. It kind of masks like that, just dry sound.
I just imagine guys like Jeff Beck and Eddie had like perfect pitch, though. You know what I mean? They would. You almost think they would have to, like like Beck, because it's hey, listen, they were who they were for a reason. I get, you know what I mean?
A lot of times, like, I don't think a lot of people catch on, but like if you watch a lot of early live stuff before the Floyd, like Ed will play, like you can hear him testing if his guitar's in tune while a song is going by playing harmonics and going do do do, and you can hear, like is it in tune or not, kind of internally, and then you hear a dive or whatever, and now it's back in tune. Like there were things he did that was like that weren't just like sitting there going. fifth fret or whatever and adjusting it like
Right.
you know,
And
a beginner would do. Like there's ways to get around it, and like even just on the albums going like, you know,
it's remarkable when guys do that. Tanner, it's
Yeah.
remarkable. There's a video clip of Joe Walsh, for example, setting up a guitar, and he's tuning the guitar, and he's doing the intonation back in the 80s by ear, Kyle. And he's tuning it by hitting the harmonics. You know, so you're right, John. You know, these guys had perfect pitch, you know, clearly. And I agree with you. One of the reasons why they are who they are is because, you know, they could hear that. I can't. I've got to use a tuner.
Yeah. Yeah. And
For
you know
Ed
what?
to figure that out, for Ed to figure it out on his own so young too is insane to me. Like to figure out, I mean, obviously, like once you hear it, it's you can hear it, but like just the fact that he was, you know, figuring out that guitars are not perfectly intonated instruments and tuning as such to make songs like Running with the Devil sound better. It's insane to me that, you know, a lot of people, I mean, there is like Eddie had a lot of practice. You don't get me wrong. Like he was who he was because of the thousands of hours of practice, but things like that, where it's like the stuff that he developed so young, it's like there was some like pre-existing like fate involved where it's like, this guy was just destined to be, you know, an amazing musician, and you know, it's just kind of natural thing. I mean, someone could put the exact same amount of time into guitar as Ed, and they wouldn't be as observant or
I think
innovative.
that's another thing that you kind of think of it too, is that they basically, a lot of these guys played one guitar. That was their, you know what I mean? Because they don't like to switch guitars during it, because each guitar's got its own personality, and it just feels different, and they know the things that they have to do to, you know, to make that guitar work for them. So I think that's why, I mean, guys like Eddie, he, you know, like to pretty much stay with one guitar, even at the very end, the last tour. He just played the ivory one, except for, you know, I'll Wait or whatever it was. That was the only, you know, otherwise it was that guitar for the whole tour, you know? So I guess, like you said, you get used to one guitar, and you know the ins and outs of it, and the idiosyncrasies and the quirks of that particular guitar, and how to make it work for you. You know, I'm sure
He was neurotic. I mean, he was neurotic when it came to that. Like hearing the fact that like he was, you know, still making like Tom Weber in the last tour tune his guitar, like literally one string was like -1 cent or something like that, which literally isn't even perceivable to the human ear. Like I looked it up a while ago for some research. Like a human can't discern like 5 cents of a semitone or whatever. So like the fact that he, like in his head, that's what it was, and sure it was mostly placebo for something like that. And Tom was like, you know, whatever, that's what he said it to, and I'll do that every night. But you know, there's that famous footage of, I think it's during like a Jump or something like that, where he's like Tom was his back at that time, and he keeps shoving the neck into the stage to reset it, and it keeps making it worse or whatever. And like I think Tom actually spoke about it on a podcast somewhere, but yeah, he like
I think they tried to blame him for that.
yeah, tried to blame him as he's shoving the neck into the stage and completely screwing up the tuning, most likely.
Yeah,
it's funny also how you bring up like he was destined, you know, just to be who he was, because he even said in multiple interviews too, when they're like, well, where do you get your inspiration from, your ideas from? He's like, I don't know. He's like, it just comes from.
Yes, yeah.
He's like, a higher power. He's like, I don't know. He's like, it just comes through me, I guess.
It's certainly, I that's how I see it. And like I think a while ago I heard like a story, it might have even been from like the Texas Jams, like 78, where like whoever was there watched them play the solo, and there was like, it might have just been like a faint memory of them, but like watching him complete the solo and take a step back and like watch where, like look where he stood, it looked like there was an aura, like almost he didn't even know how he just did whatever he did. And I'm sure there was some of that, being that he was just so talented and practice and stuff like that. I'm sure he surprised himself sometimes when it came to playing something new. Or I mean, even like developing the Mean Street intro or something like that, I'm sure there was a moment where he was like, "Oh my god, oh my god, how did I do that?"
Yeah, he even said that in interviews too, that people would come up and be like, "Well, how did you do it?" He's like, "To be honest with you, I don't even know."
Yeah, it is amazing because, you know, we know he was a great guitar player, but these songs, it's just like, you know, as we're going to talk about later about the Sammy Hagar tour, it's just like these. I would really like Joe Satriani like to be interviewed. I'd love Chris Gill to sit down and interview him about Eddie's like the songwriting, just and the riffs and the parts. I'd like to hear Chris like see what like Joe Satriani. And okay, Joe, now you spent like a few months learning all these things like that, and you know which ones were his favorites, and you know, I know we're going to talk about it, I don't want to give it away, but it's just like I've heard some things that Joe's playing that I'm like, man, that's really cool. It's like I'm glad he's being himself when he's not, you know, like Sammy said, he's hitting the marks that he has to hit for the solos like Eddie did. There's certain things you gotta do, but then I'm glad he's being Joe Satriani too, and just doing his own thing with the music that Eddie wrote too. And on a few songs, I was like, I was like, wow, I like where he went with that, you know, like I think I don't know if it was the Seventh Seal or I forget which one it was, but it was kind of cool what he was doing with that too. So which I kind of like, but I mean Eddie's songwriting, it's like, where did that come from? You know what I mean? Why are his riffs better than, you know, than everybody else's? It's like, why, you know what? It's just unexplained. It's just that
so unique in every way. Like there is no like. I mean, obviously you can define Van Halen into like, you know, hard rock genre kind of in general, and like into the 90s more kind of AOR kind of alternative sometimes and this and that. But like I've been messing around with those AI kind of song generators that are blowing up on the internet right now. And like you can't type in bands and have it create an exact song of the band, even though for a few weeks you could actually. And I've heard some of the example. I heard like somebody used Led Zeppelin as an example, and it was like, it's insane what these programs can do without the restrictions that they're now putting on to make people not, you know, pass these songs off as real. But anyways, I've like tried to get it to like generate like a Van Halen song just by putting in like a bunch of describing words, adjectives and stuff and it's like it can never do it. It can never, like, there's like no defining genre or describe like that makes it sound like it. It always ends up sounding like Skid Row or you know, like if you go to AOR, it sounds too like, you know, Def Leppard-y, and it's like it's really crazy how they always just sounded so unique regardless of the era and album touring cycle or whatever. It's like his riffs, like, you know, there's a lot of chords and stuff, but he has a lot of just like note riffs, which I a big reason why I like Van Halen is because like the riffs aren't just chord, you know, a repetition of chords, strumming and chords and stuff like that. Like there's a lot of notes involved and stuff like that.
Beauty of being one guitar player.
Yeah, exactly.
So Kyle, what is your favorite tone of Eddie's, and what are your favorite songs and albums and things?
Yeah, man, I go through phases. I feel like most people, but I'd say my main phase as of late, and probably the tone I would say I quote unquote searched for the longest, was anywhere between Foreign Lawful Carnal Knowledge to Balance. You know, when he was really using the harmonizers and this and that. So, and his tone obviously sounded huge, which is the whole reason why I even went to the whole wet, dry, wet down that rabbit hole, because I was just always just like, man, I was like, I have no idea how you got this tone. I mean, I tried, you know, the Moore pitch box. I tried the Boss, you know, PS6. I've tried, you know, the Eventide. I've tried literally anything I possibly could, and it's like, anytime I ran at mono, you would get it somewhat in the ballpark, but I could never quite figure out how the chorus, quote unquote, sound or the detune effect would just trail on after the dry sound would end, and I just could not wrap my head around that. And then, you know, finally, I don't know, just through research or watching interviews, and finally they're just like, you know, wet, dry, wet, and I was like, what the hell is wet, dry, wet? And so then I started losing my mind over the research, because it was just like, it seemed like there was this impossible task that only, trillionaires could afford and this and that. And then I came across a couple of videos where other people had kind of done it just in their home. And I was like, there's no way that this is this simple. And, I mean, again, you can make it as complicated as you want, but once I finally did that in-house and I got it right on the first try, it blew my mind, because I was like, here I am all these years trying all this different stuff, and I could never figure out exactly what it was. And again, there's only one Eddie Van Halen, and the tone was in his hands and in his soul, you know what I mean? But as far as like the gear itself, like you can get in the ballpark and get super close within sense of being where he was at as far as tone wise. And Wet Dry Wet opened that up for me. So for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, I actually think that album in particular, and again, my own personal opinion, I think was his best playing ever. Only because you could tell by that time that was after 5150, so he was kind of already got just the horses unleashed, so to speak, because he was under the umbrella of Roth and this and that. So once he got out from underneath against that, again, no offense to Roth, I mean, obviously he grew up, being a better musician by being with him and vice versa. That relationship was fine. But then once he finally got to really dive into who he was as a musician, I feel like after 5150, that success, I think it was like now all ties are off. And with this person that's super creative just as much as I am, I can hit different registries, and you could just hear in that album all these different styles. Like Eddie used a lot of jazz style chords and a lot of bridge breakdowns in a lot of those songs. And again, very subtle, but you're like, wait a minute, you're like, what is this? And how in the heck is he making this fit musically?
Wow.
Theoretically it doesn't make sense,
No.
but he had an idea and sense of what he was doing, and I think that was his best playing, in my opinion. And then the sound that I probably gravitated towards the most was Balance, only because it was such a heavy processed sound. It almost sounded fake and video game like, in some, so to speak. And I grew up playing video games, not saying that it sounded digital, but it was just a huge, massive sound for only one guitar player. And I just always thought that some magical thing happened in the studio where it was just mixed that way. And I was like, there's no way they're going to be able to play this live. And then I go back and, watch videos of playing it live. And I'm like, how does this sound?
Yep.
Almost the exact same. I'm like, this is crazy. And then that's when I started learning about the rack systems and this and that. And then I was just like, oh my God. So like I said, as far as albums, For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, Bounce are probably my favorites, but For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, top to bottom, I mean, I can just listen and never skip a song through all of that. And that's a lot of Van Halen albums too. Like
I agree. I agree with you about that particular album, because I find myself constantly listening to that album still. And you know what? I don't know if you guys, on one of the Van Halen groups online, somebody actually made FLAC files with AI, and I guess they removed all the vocals, and they did every album instrumental, and it is fun to listen to. It's like, I forget who I was talking to about it, and they said it's like, it was who was it? I'm trying to think who it was. They said it was basically Ty Price said it's like I'm listening to these songs for the first time again, because without the vocals on there and the FLAC files, the quality is pretty good. It is some of the best like vocal removed AI type of FLAC tracks that I've ever heard, believe it or not. And if you haven't heard them, I mean, I'll send them to you. But it's just unbelievable, because you hear so many things on guitar that I didn't realize that was even there. You know what I mean? And all these years later, I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that's what he was doing there. So
that's simply how I got into the Hagar era. I mean, I think I really got into Van Halen when I was like 16, and for the first like 4 or 5 years, it was just all Roth kind of stuff. And I'll admit that, influence from other people on Facebook and stuff like that, just like, hating the Hagar era for no reason and stuff like that. And I think finally I someone started posting instrumental versions of like the 5150 album songs, and I was like, man, like this really isn't that different than the 1984. Like, I mean, you know, obviously there's some differences, but I just was like, it really got me into the, you know, realizing that the music really wasn't all that different or, you know, or worse according to all these people I was talking to. And then, you know, once I kind of got used to Sammy's voice a little bit more, but I've always been someone that can tone out the singer regardless. Like, you know, like I've had, I remember, you know, especially growing up being, you know, a young guy who loves classic rock, like you play Led Zeppelin to people my age, and they, like, I heard a lot of people say like, God, he's so whiny. He sounds so whiny. And I'm like, if you're listening to Led Zeppelin for the vocals, like you're listening to the wrong thing. Like you're not, and that, but that's just like a modern thing, a young person thing. But a modern thing is like being that a lot of the new artists, like there's nothing instrumentally impressive about the music, so all they have to listen to is the singer. So it makes sense that, you know, people would listen to that older stuff and go.
I'm so happy you said that too, because I thought I was the only person, not in existence, but like only person I knew where I would always hear music first. The only way I would ever hear lyrics is if the lyrics actually hit me in some point in time in my life or hit me emotionally. That'd be the only time I would ever hear a lyric, and it'd have to be like a catchy, you know, chorus or phrase that would really even get me to then listen to the rest of the lyrics. But I would always hear music first, and maybe it's just because, you know, we're guitar players, so we're biased. But, you know, I would always hear guitar first. If the riff didn't grab me, you know, I wasn't really as into the song. To me, the riff and then everything else music-wise is what made the song.
I still
point.
don't
Yeah,
know.
I can sing. I can sing every Van Halen song. I can sing every Van Halen song, but I don't know what he's talking. Like I'd have to sit down with the lyric sheet and go, "Oh, that's what it's about." Because
it took me years to figure out what Pound Cake was about. I mean, when I was 16, shows you where I was at in my sexual life. But, you know, I was just like Pound Cake. I was like, and I'm just sitting there. I'm like, it's such a happy song. You know, I'm just jamming, cruising in my car, just getting my driver's license, and then later that entire album, you know, we realized that's essentially the F word, and I was like, oh, this all comes full circle now. Spanked, you know, to everything else on. I was like, all right, got it.
I know I'm not the only one, but I guarantee that most guitar players who love Van Halen do not know the words to a lot of. I still don't know what sometimes I make up if I'm humming along and singing. I still don't know what Roth is saying sometimes, or even what Hagar is saying. I still don't know. And sometimes I'll look like on Apple Music, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what he's saying. It's something completely different than I thought he was saying all these years later. So
it's like watching a movie with subtitles. Sometimes you're like, all these years I never knew they said that, and had I known that one plot point, this whole movie was a completely different experience for me.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. It's interesting that you guys should talk about guitar players and vocalists. I've got a couple of friends who love Red Hot Chili Peppers, but they can't stand the lead singer, and they only like Red Hot Chili Peppers because of John Frusciante, you know, and it took me a while, guys, to get my head around that, you know, and this was recently because he's such a big dynamic part of that band. But, you know, I think you're right, Tanner. You know, sometimes as guitar players, like we all are, we can kind of zone out a little bit. You know, John Mayall, for example, passed away recently, the godfather of the British electric blues scene. And there's a lot of songs, John, that he sings, you know, and I'm not discounting him at all because I love him. You know, he's a great musician, don't get me wrong. But some of the vocals on some of the albums that he's done aren't the best. But, you know, Mick Taylor is playing guitar, so I love it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I feel the same way about Chili Peppers. I personally like all of the elements of the Chili Peppers, but the girl I was dating all of 2023, we're not together anymore, but she was like, we were listening to Chili Peppers in the car one day, and she wasn't a big fan, but I remember her saying, I'd like the Chili Peppers a lot more if they had a different singer, I think. And I was like, get out. Mostly because my mom was the biggest Chili Peppers fan, and she was the one that got me into it. I actually saw them a couple of years ago in Boston, and that was amazing. But you know, I understand. I mean, there's a lot of moments where it's questionable, but really, I think that's part. I mean, it's part of it. They were humorous group of people. Like it's not, you know, if they were more serious and trying to put off what they did, sometimes that, you know, I'd question it a little bit more. But when you go into something knowing that it's a joke, you can, you know, understand it better.
Yeah, Alan just mentioning the second verse of "Everybody Wants Some." I actually saw like on Instagram a little clip of that today, saying that I guess he had the lyrics written down, but he forgot them, and he just kind of figured he'd ad lib and they'd punch it in or whatever like that. And then apparently afterwards they were like, no, leave it, whatever. You know, the part, I don't know what he's saying. See, something about looking for a moopy or something. I don't know what he's even saying there, but it's funny. Alan mentioned, I just saw that today. A thing about that. Kyle, so you know, in the last 10 years, that wet, dry, wet has been much more attainable for everybody on a budget. You know, because like you said, you mentioned the PS6. Everybody, that was great. It was for what it did. It was phenomenal. And then, you know, a lot of us moved to the, you know, Eventide stuff, and you know, and it's relatively. I was helping this guy set up his wet, dry, wet, and you know, it was pretty very simple to do. I think he was surprised at how simple. Jeremy Hefner, I don't know if you guys know Jeremy. He's on a lot of the Van Halen boards, and so he was setting it up, and you know, and I tell people, you don't have to go crazy. You could do it, you know, on a budget. You get one of those little David the Bray LO1s. They're like $50. They're made to order, and that's what I still use. That thing, I love it. That thing is incredible.
Yeah, so, that's what's on my rig right now.
Yeah, exactly. I highly recommend that if anybody's doing a wet, dry, wet, and you know, and there's a lot of ways to do it as well. Like Jeremy's doing it one way. I have a power amp. I don't know. You want to explain your setup?
Yeah. So what I'm using is it is a power amp, but it's actually the Rockville RPA5, which is actually used for it's like a DJ booth. Okay. Like if you use that just to power like your outside monitors, like you go work at, you know, a wedding banquet or something or whatever. That's all it is. And like I said, I saw another guy on YouTube do that, and I was like, there's no way. And then he started playing, and he was getting amazing sounds. And granted, he used the 5153, the 50 watt head, and I'm not a huge fan of those heads. It's not that you can't get great tones, it's just not for me. It's just that probably one of my least favorite tones was the different kind of truth tone. Again, not that I don't like it, it's grown on me over the years. But that amp for me was a much heavier register bass wise, and it was a lot of mids and not a whole lot of treble. So I actually decided to go. I was going to get a Soldano, the slow 30, but again, we're talking that's a lot more money. And then Eddie used 100 watt really, so I was like, well, if I really want to get, you know, if I'm going all out, I'll get the slow 100. But then I had never really tried the PV 6505 Mini. And I've heard great things about it, but you know, a lot of people either poo on PV or this or that, like it's a love-hate thing. And again, I mean, for me, any company's had its fair share of highs and lows. I mean, look at Gibson. Not to throw Gibson on the bus, I love Gibson, but look at their quality control there for a few years. You know what I mean? I mean, Fender's put out some duds where they try to step outside the box and try some things, but again, and that's how you learn. You know, it's trial and error like anything else in life. And so I tried the PV 6505 Mini. I actually reached out to Rob Johnson because he actually had his 6505 Mini, but he kind of custom made his to where it was like the 5150 block letter. And I always thought that was super cool. So I reached out to him. I was like, hey, man, how'd you do that just real quick? He was like, oh, you know, just pulled the grill off and got this and that. And, you know, because Rob's a cool guy. I'm sure you guys probably already know him. I know he's been featured on the show before. And I was like, I'm not going to copy off of you, but I said, you've kind of inspired me to do something here. And then that's when I started looking at all the painted heads that Eddie had back in the PV days and this and that. You know, some of the grills were painted, some of the outside, the Tolex was painted. So I painted mine up, and that's what I did. But, you know, not to go off that tangent, but like you said, you know, wet, dry, wet, it is a very achievable thing. And I did get a lot of reach outs and a lot of people with a lot of questions, and you know, some people are trying to make it a little more complicated than what it was, but it's only as complicated as you make it is what I try to let them know, because there are so many ways to be able to reach said goal. And, you know, I even got some feedback and people were like, you know, they felt a certain way because they were like, well, you know, you can get this, you know, by doing a fractal or this or that. And it's almost like they were offended you know, that I said that, you know, this is one way you can get it, but I always try to make my videos clear. I'm like, there are a multitude of people out there that can help you, a multitude of ways you can achieve it. You know, my thing was the concept. It's like, you know, you can get in the ballpark in the realm of this stuff without having to, you know, bust your budget or break the bank, and, you know, just put a smile on your face, even if it's for 3 minutes, just sit there and play your guitar and forget about the rest of the world. That's what this is all about at the end of the day.
I really think Eddie kind of discovered the whole detune. I mean, people were probably doing it. He probably saw that, but when they recorded, because the way I kind of first put it together is I bought an OB8, an Oberheim OB8 back in 1988. You probably weren't even born yet.
Nope. Just a year later.
So I bought an OB8 in 1988, and I was trying to get the jump sound on it, and so patch A1 is the jump sound. It's a preset in there. You didn't even have to do anything. You just gotta tweak some knobs. Eddie liked to turn the analog knobs, but there's a detune knob on the OB8, and when you turn that detune knob and you find the sweet spot, it just sounds like huge. So, you know, I think that got into his head. He's like, wow, this is like insane how you're actually making it go out of tune slightly. It's just like, and it makes it, sound huge.
Yeah, and that's actually my next video is actually kind of talking about through the years, because just as you said, like there's prime examples of, you can hear Eddie. He was always messing with his tone. You know, each album was a little bit different. He's tweaking it, but you really started to hear the chorus start to take more and more effect on more and more tunes. It wasn't a whole album, but you could start hearing certain tunes where he was really feeling it, and then you go to the next one. I mean, you know, even from as early as Pretty Woman. You know, off 84, like he was chorusing it up on that. You know, you can hear chorus on Spanked. You can hear, it's like there's chorus all over his albums, but like you said, like there's certain songs where you really start to hear it really take effect, and then like you said, I think he just hit detune somewhere in that realm, and then Wet Dry Wet just enhanced it even more.
Yeah, I think on Diver Down, I think he was using the Roland like DC30. Alan, if you're in there, you'll correct me, but I think he was using the DC30 on that. And
it's different because that's not in the same vein as Eventides, where it's just a fixed detune, where the Rolands were actual like very modulation chorus. Right. Still kind of a light texture layer, but more of like closer to like a boss, or like you see, whatever those.
It's kind of weird because I think, Alan, if you're there again, you can correct me on this too. I think as far back as Van Halen 2, he was using Eventide. Like I mean, they might have had it in the rack at Sunset Sound, but like a 909, and then he switched to the 949. I think all the way up through 5150, I think was 949. I think OU812 is maybe the first time they used it, or he may have been using the 949 on OU812. Anybody in the chat, you can correct me on that. I don't know. I always thought OU812 was the H3000, and
I think it was the H3000.
Yeah, I think so. And then obviously on For Unlawful Chronology it was, but he was using it way back. But Diver Down was kind of weird. I don't, he may have just fell in love with that DC30 at the time or whatever, because that's pretty much what's on there. And that thing sounds incredible too. It's amazing.
And the EVH pedal does a really good job doing that sound too.
Yeah, it is.
I think we talked, like the detune was definitely like a fattener, and we were talking about that, but like making his guitar stereo was a big step for him too, starting in, well, I think the first time it was really fully stereo was Drop Dead Legs. That kind of that's kind of more of a 5150 kind of stereo sound, and but I think that was an attempt to like fake kind of a double tracking sound, especially on like 5150, and then like I think it kind of got kind of meddled for the next few albums, and I think Balance was a return to that, because lately I've been listening to Balance and stuff like that, and studying that, and it's very stereo, not very in the middle, but I still think he still was messing around, despite the fact that he was using like the same stuff. I mean, OU812 was like like he used, I can't remember what song it was, but he said he used his rack on one song or whatever, and the rest
Black
of
and blue. Was it black and blue?
yeah, I think so. And there's like a difference there, and I think as opposed to like the other tracks, which were, you know, all of the effects came afterwards. The stereo stuff just came after the recording of the microphones. But yeah, I really like when I listened to, especially like I sent John a clip the other day. I was shooting for the what was that? The Best of Both Worlds track that they did in 2004 or whatever. It's About Time. Like I was experimenting with that, and I like first thing I did was double track because it's so like it sounds double tracked. But after I like messed around with it, I was like, I think this is just like, you know, 30 millisecond detune stereo. Like it sounded way closer, and it's like it saves you from having to double track. And I think Ed, you know, wasn't a fan of double tracking. I mean, he obviously got more comfortable with overdubs and such over the years, but one of the only double tracking songs I can think of is So This Is Love. And you know,
yeah, he really wasn't a big fan of double tracking. He'd mentioned that before too. That he
spoke about it about especially about the Gene Simmons demos, because he was so used to playing like fills, doing like the Clapton like riffs and then fills in between kind of thing, and Gene was just like simplify, so then you can do it again. And he didn't even know he didn't understand what that even meant. So, but it made for a cool sound. I mean, a lot of people don't really care for those Gene Simmons demos, but like that House of Pain, the initial version of House of Pain there is one of the most like metal 70s metal songs I think I've ever heard. I actually was looking through this playlist on YouTube the other day, like 70s proto metals, just to kind of hear some new stuff. And someone had put the House of Pain Gene Simmons demo into the playlist. And I was like, that's funny. I hope this spreads around.
Yeah, right.
Speaking of that, Gene Simmons played that recently with
it's actually pretty cool.
It was cool, yeah. Brian, I think his last name is Tishy, the drummer. He's really good. He's played with a bunch of people, and he does like, he usually kind of emulates John Bonham, but he also is a pretty big Alex fan too, and he did a cover of I'm the One on his channel, and a lesson actually too, which was pretty helpful for me in my process.
So did you guys see the comment here from Alan? Eventide was used on the harmony guitars in Jamie's Crone. First use of the H910. Then it was used in line for the solos or bottom up in various parts. Interesting.
That's what I like.
It's in the studio. It's in the studio in the control room in the 78, but for the recording of Van Halen 2, they're photographed in the control room, and you can see the rack behind them, and there is the early Eventide units in there, and I hear it all over Van Halen 2. I mean, like bottoms up, especially when he cleans up in the beginning, the first kind of thing I hear, and then I hear it all over You're No Good and stuff like that, just as a light kind of textured layer. And then I don't seem to hear it that much on Women and Children First. It's almost like they forgot about it, because I always find that album sounding a lot more kind of natural, and especially in the drums kind of department, it always kind of sounded more like the the Warner Brothers demos and stuff like that, where it was just more of a natural thing. And then Fair Warning obviously was like, when people think early harmonizer, a lot of people think it started in Fair Warning because it was the first obvious use of it.
Mm-hmm. That's why I like the Eventide H9, because you can actually get the 910 and the 949 settings on there. That thing's a game changer.
John always recommends it to me. I gotta get one, and Alan does too.
The best part about it too is it actually has it's kind of like a love note to Van Halen, because there's a lot of presets on there that are actually he had programmed from his H9s early, because there's a patch for Panama, there's one for Women in Love, and there's a couple other ones on there too. But I mean, that's what I've used for my For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge and my balance tonas, that 949 910 combo, and then I have my different synths, as far as how much detune effect I want in my pan to my left and my right. But between that, the SDE 3000, which is you can go down the rabbit hole with that thing. That is an amazing delay pedal, and then with a reverb, and you got the balance tone. Yeah, I'm right there.
Yeah.
Yep, it's an unmistakable big white pedal.
Yeah. I recommend people to go and check out Kyle's channel, folks. I've put a couple of links already in the chat, and attached to the description already, if you're watching on a replay, is Kyle's channel, and he's devoted a lot of videos on his channel to this experience and examples. Just recently, only a couple of weeks ago, I think you just did a wet, dry, wet setup on your channel. So go and check it out, folks. And one of the great things that guys like Kyle are doing, John, is that the key here is that you don't need to spend a shitload of money, John, to get the sounds, that's been in your head for 20, 30, 40 years. It's an achievable experience, Kyle.
Yeah, 100%. That's, like I said, that was my main goal with all of that, is just to take the years of struggle for the majority of us, and try to give people, different options to be able to, achieve those goals, even from the Yamaha THR 10X. It's still one of the greatest solid state sounding amp I've ever heard in my life. And as far as Van Halen, they can nail any era that you want. And again, only $300 or $400, out of your pocket, as opposed to the thousands and thousands if you want to go down that realm.
Yeah, which is what a lot of guys like to do. That they're interested in. Everything is within your budget, of course. Like a lot of us, we've mentioned this before, Kyle, on the channel. The EVH guitars, the painted and the striped series guitars that you couldn't get back in the day when we were young guys, and you were making them yourselves. Now you can get them, and John, look at your ivory guitar that you got recently. Your that you've always wanted. Now you're at a state where you can achieve those things. You can buy them, so they're geared to guys with a little bit of money now. And why not?
There's an online, there's online groups in order to really talk about it and stuff, and get the information. And that's what I try to do with my drum videos, is prove that it's like you don't need everything in Ed's rig to sound exactly like Ed, on any given album or tour or whatever. Like there are certain ways to save some money that don't require. And if you want a replica rig, go for it. But
sure,
that's what I'm trying to prove, especially with my drum series, is that you don't need a 70s era Ludwig kit to record to make this exactly sound like, it's just, there's a lot of these kind of fallacies that people have created, and there's the big tone wood debate and stuff like that. All this stuff, like, you need an ash body in order to sound like Van Halen, and it's like, shut up.
And that's one of the big wonders too, is like you spend all this money on this gear. It's no different than buying a new guitar. A lot of people will buy a new guitar thinking, oh, it's going to make me play better, without putting in the work and the time to actually make it sound good. Because if you can't make it talk, it's not going to sound anything, no matter who you're trying to flatter or trying to sound like, you know what I mean? Or even yourself. If you don't put in the time or effort, that's what I always tell people too. It's like, you can get every harmonizer, every amp Eddie owned. You can get his Frankenstein guitar in your very hands. But if you can't make it talk, you're not going to sound anything remotely like him.
We've all been there. When I was first getting into Van Halen, I remember I had a Squire Affinity Strat or something like that, and I remember wanting to play the dive bombs in the first section of Pretty Woman, and not having a whammy bar for my Strat. So I went on Amazon, I found a Squire compatible tremolo arm, and I remember at that point it was only available as an add-on item. You couldn't just buy it on its own. So I was like, okay. So I was like, the only other thing I know about Eddie Van Halen is that he uses the Phase 90. So I ordered like a whatever $60, $70 MXR Phase 90, and then that tremolo arm as an add-on, and I got it. And I'm playing through this Marshall MG15, and I was like, this doesn't sound like Eruption.
Oh yeah.
I thought the phaser was the absolute key to Van Halen. What the heck?
I didn't even know you could play open chords with distortion. I would just play with bar chords and it would just die out. I'm like, how are they making it ring? I'm like, well, I need more distortion. Let's go to 13. And then it still sounded like crap. And I remember there was a replica 5150 guitar in a guitar store back in Louisville, Kentucky, where I'm born. It's called Guitar Emporium. The place is still there. And this before everybody got cease and desist letters from Eddie's lawyers. And it was a blue Strat, had a Floyd on it and a rosewood neck, and that was like my first probably decent guitar that I had. It was like $500. I remember I saved up forever for that thing. And I actually want to see what's Richie Sambora guitar. Actually, now that I think about it, I don't have it anymore. I have to go back and look. I think it was a Richie Sambora guitar. And I remember I traded that in, and I was trying to get this 5150. It was the first Stripe guitar I'd ever saw on the shelf, and I was like, I have to have this guitar. Have to. I'm like, this has got the stripes on it, like I saw from the Best of Both Worlds album. I got to get it. And I can't believe I'm such a dummy. I was so gullible. I was 16 and I'm super impressionable, so don't judge me. But I go up to the front desk clerk, and I was just like, hey man, I want to trade this Strat in. And he was just like, well, why? I was like, it just sounds too clean. And this thing had a humbucker on it. It was a shred, but I didn't know what the hell I was doing. So I was just like, yeah, it just sounds too clean. So let me trade that in for this. And then I had the 5150 in my hand. And literally, no joke, just dead face, he just goes, yeah, you're not going to want that either. That plays pretty clean too. And surely enough, it got in my head. And I was like, oh no. I'm like, I can't have another clean sounding guitar. So I go put it right back on the shelf. I don't remember what I walked out with that day, but I think to this day I've tried to forget it and just put it in the back of the times where I don't remember. I fell for that crap, and to this day I could beat myself. And it probably wasn't even any decent replica, but back then I had no idea what I was doing. And again, that brings me back to the videos. It's just for a lot of people starting out who just don't know, I didn't have friends that played. I didn't have anybody I could call up, back in the day. All this information now is so readily available for people, and it's really and truly there to help. Not all people have the best of intentions, but I feel like the majority of us do, and try not to mislead people, but that's one of my embarrassing stories.
We all have those.
I was like, too clean? Right. Yeah, you're right. This 5150 is going to sound way too clean. I don't need that. Get that out of here. Give me this ovation. This will really shred.
Yeah. We're going to do a bit of a shout out, John. Have you got the computer there in front of you? We haven't done it yet, but
let's go through.
If you'd like to do a bit of a shout out, bro, while we've got some guys in here. We got. Can I just do one shout out though before I pass it on to you? Fruitcake Tony. We mentioned you at the beginning of the show, bro, and thank you for doing your weekly EVH Halenville shows, and we look forward to your scheduled Van Halen shows that you do when we get some information on Van Halen. I'll get you to do a shout out, Johnny. Thank you, brother.
All right. So we had Nelson in there at the very beginning, Rodriguez, but I know he was just got into the new house, and I need to load up the unpacked boxes into the goddamn garage. So Nelson might be still in the garage for all we know. Nelson, come back. let's see. Then we have, let's see. We know Alan Garber. Alan's good. Alan's in there. Providing fun facts for us tonight. Whenever we have any questions, we throw it to Professor Garber over there. So, hey, Alan, hope everything's good. Andy Carson checking in. How's it going, Andy? Hope everything's good. Great to hear from you. Let's see. Christopher Live, Sawa. What's up, Christopher?
Hey, Chris.
Let's see. Who else we got? Johnny Heartbreaker. Van Halen. Yeah, I think I've heard of them. Yep. That's it. Let's see. The Lawnmower Tapes. How you doing? Let's see. He was asking about. I was hoping some of you had heard the Ryan Brown Running with the Devil Dweezil episode 29 with Alex Van Halen deep dive. I haven't heard that. I got to check that out. Let's see. Simon was here. Simon Hosford checking in. Haven't heard from Simon in a while. Hope all is well, Simon. He might be here and gone. I don't know. Let's see who else we got here. Let's see. Turd Ferguson checking in.
That guy, he's the one that's been posting all the Alex Van Halen isolated drums lately.
Okay.
Which is awesome. It's been really, I mean, I've done it myself, but having it all on YouTube is nice versus like Google Drive and stuff like that. Just being able to look it up has been
I have been checking those out. Yeah, exactly. And let's see who else we got. Jerry Leica, the legend. Jerry Leica. He's here. And John ZD351 again with the Eddie, he says. What's up, John? Let's see. Adam Roach. Hey, Adam. It's been a while. Yeah. How you doing? Fruitcake Tony. We just said, hey, Tony, how are you? And I think I think we got it covered.
Cool. I'm going to just drop Turd's YouTube channel in the chat as well, guys. I've just had a look at it. So
definitely drop some turds.
Yeah. I've just subscribe Turd to your channel, but go and check out Turd because he's got some great stuff on his channel. So quickly, Tanner, I suppose what you need to be doing, and I've included your channel too, bro, in the chat, and I'll attach that to the description. So you've been chasing Alex. Have you caught him yet?
I guess that's up for everyone else to decide. But I mentioned it in the first video. If anyone hasn't seen it, I've been spending pretty much since January of last year. I made a post about Alex's kit resembling Bill Bruford of Yes fame, King Crimson fame. And it started a conversation with Alan and John and all these guys that I'd been friends with for a while on Facebook. Alan and I have been talking for years now, but I hadn't really talked to John much. And it kind of sparked some interest on, 1984 recording and stuff. And that really is what started, my journey to the lit the fuse, and it started my journey on mostly the 1984 kind of drum sound and stuff. So that was the inspiration for our two 1984 deep dives that we kind of started with John, Alan, and the crew. And pretty much since then, behind the scenes, I started with guitar when I was 8 years old, and I was a guitar player really, all the way up until pretty much last year. I mean, I still am, but having my own apartment and stuff, and now having my own studio, I really have been pursuing drums more. And I just kind of noticed once I started to kind of look into Alex's gear, it was kind of unexplored territory. I mean, there's a few interviews he's talked a little bit about gear, but rarely does anyone ask him about gear. They really only ask him about, the songs or Eddie. as if he really wants to be talking about Eddie all the time. But so I was like, noticing that there wasn't a whole lot of points of contention like there is, as we mentioned with Ed's stuff. There's a lot of opinionated people, and there is a lot of information. There's still not a lot of information about certain stuff, and I was, I really like to be the guy that figures some stuff out just by experimentation, because drumming not being a melodic instrument, there are a lot more kind of objective truths to it that you can figure out by experimenting. Like, for instance, like I learned in the process of trying to recreate the first album's drum sound. For years, Alex talked about Don Landy making him take the bottom heads off of all of his toms and kick. And so I went into it with that, and I noticed that when I tuned up my drums to the pitches of the album, which I have figured out using these programs that allow you to, like, if you take like a tom hit, it shows you the spectrum, and it shows you like whatever the peak is the is the pitch or whatever the resonant frequency. So when I tuned the drum up to that pitch, I was noticing that I couldn't even get that high. Like, if I tuned it up that high, it would totally choke out. So I was like, oh, so that meant that pretty much means that he had bottom heads on those two rack toms. There's like stuff like that where I was like, I can, confidently say this now, versus just, saying, oh, he said it in an interview, so it has to be true. So stuff like that, figuring stuff like that out for people that, especially guitar players that don't know the first thing about drums and stuff like that, being that I am a guitar player. So yeah, finding stuff like that. And then really only about a month ago, I just, I told John that I really kind of wanted to make like a series about the drums, mostly from inspiration from our friend Jim Gostad. He has made his series of Eddie's tones and stuff, and has had really good, interactions and stuff. And I kind of want to do the same thing. So I ripped off his kind of video style a little bit, added some playing performances and talking, and then kind of a mix thing, which really is a lot more of it. Like, a lot of Alex's sound, and especially in the early days, comes from mixing, whether it be EQ and reverb and stuff like that. So I don't know, one day I just got a spurt of energy, and I went out, set up my drums, and they were kind of already set up like the first album, and I tuned them all up, and just decided I was going to record. And my process is set up the mics, and I can actually hear my drums through my headphones and my computer in real time, fully mixed actually, which is really helpful. Pretty cool modern innovations and stuff like that, but it allows me to really cut down some time. And so I just shot the video in one day and posted it, and I got some pretty good interactions. And I can't wait to get into the more whatever you call it, the albums that matter more to me and more to other people. I think, a lot of people care about the first album, but the first, I would say, 3 albums, the drum sound is pretty weak in my opinion, or not weak, just not indicative of Alex and his, signature sound. So, I might just skip the 3rd album and come back to it if somebody really wants to hear it. I mean, there's not much different on it.
Second, right?
Yeah, it's not much different than the 2nd album. The kick is actually a lot different, and I like to touch on it, but it's not really worth the whole video for me right now, especially since the next album is Fair Warning, and that's really the first kind of inkling of when you hear Alex's, snare sound and stuff like that. That was the first album he used the Rosewood snare, and plus, like, there's a few different mixes to cover too. Like you've got the main album mix, and then you have like the Sunday Afternoon in the Park mix, which in an interview he spoke about it, saying that it was like one room mic or two room mics, something like that captured the drums, which is why they sound so much different. And then like a lot of popular snare drum in the Van Halen community is the So This Is Love snare drum. Like it sounds a lot different because it was in my opinion, is a different snare drum all completely. And I've kind of recreated it in the past, and it's going to be a little bit more of a in-depth thing. I might do, parts 1 and 2 and stuff here and there, especially as I get into the more experimental albums like 1984, where there's 2 or 3 up to like 3 different kind of drum sounds between like the Top Dead Legs, I'll Wait kind of sound, and then like the rest of the album, which is a lot closer to the other albums, just with electronic kind of stuff going on. And yeah, so anyways, the last year, behind the scenes, I pretty much recreated all of the sounds just to prove that I could do it before having to spend like months on a video that I can't, if I can't achieve or whatever. And yeah, I'm really eager. I was trying to do them in order, but when I get inspiration from an album, I'll probably just do it. I mean, I posted a video on Facebook the other day of kind of a balance kind of 1995 tour sound, and I because I've been really into that lately. So I might just kind of skip around and stuff.
I think you should, because we're waiting for balance for unlawful carnal knowledge, sounds like that.
Yeah. And anyway, I was saying earlier, like I don't have the same mics. I don't have the same drums. I did my best to have the same drum sizes and stuff, and drum heads. Like those are easy things to acquire. I have a rosewood snare drum. I have Ludwig metal snares and stuff like that. And I just bought like a new set of 2002 feisty cymbals and stuff, mainly for this series, although they're amazing cymbals. But yeah, my point really is to prove that it's not. I mean, I don't play like Alex. I've had some good compliments from people saying that I do a pretty good job. I have pretty much spent the last year and a half exclusively playing Van Halen and or like Led Zeppelin stuff to kind of keep in the same yard. But the point of the videos are to prove that it's not completely unattainable. A lot of people just quit before they even start and just say, "Oh, I'm not Alex. I'll never sound like that." But as some of us know, and Alan and I talk a lot about Eddie's playing. A lot of people quit before they even start. They just say, "I'll never be Eddie, therefore I'll never sound like him." And it's like, with that attitude, you really won't. You haven't even tried. You haven't tried. So like I said, there's some objective truths, and I think being that drums are not a melodic instrument, there aren't notes. There aren't notes to play. You can't really you don't have to discuss where on the neck something was played. It's just a lot more objective and a lot more. I can tell you, like, from watching videos, Alex got his snare sound from hitting it, from starting his from shoulder level. Like when you hit a snare drum from this height, it's going to sound a certain way versus like a Jeff Porcaro kind of wrist movement kind of thing. So I'm planning to make kind of intermediate videos in the series too that kind of explain what makes Alex sound the way he does, because it's not just mixing. And mostly I just want to call out all of the tribute bands, because the Alex element is what's lacking in a lot of them. It's like they get their drummers off of the street sometimes. It's like, did these guys even try? You got the costume and that's where it ended.
I always look for when they play Panama. If I don't hear that kick drum 4 on the floor, I'm like, get out of here, man. It's not nowhere near right then. Forget it.
The biggest thing, I'm gonna make a video soon. I actually made one already, and I deleted it because it was kind of amateurish. But the biggest thing I hear on Van Halen stuff, which is, I tried to trace kind of the origin of it, but it's the hi-hat playing. It's Alex plays the hi-hats in a very consistent way, and a lot of people who stumble upon Van Halen come from a different schooling where, like, you know, it's more ergonomic. I mean, you got people like Jeff Porcaro, and if you're coming from more kind of a hard rock background, like Phil Rudd of AC/DC is a good example. Someone that pulls in and out of hi-hat hits, like every downbeat he hits harder than the upbeats, and it's a sound, and it drives a song differently than Alex. But the difference is that Alex plays every hi-hat at the exact same velocity, I guess you could call it, if you're a MIDI person. And it's missing on so many of these tribute acts. I see all these videos pop up on Facebook of, you know, the most popular tribute bands, and I'm like, what is going on? Do people not hear what I'm hearing? Like, did they ever listen to Alex? Like, it's an easy change. I mean, it's an easy change if you practice. Unfortunately, Alex was such a unique player. I think a lot of people liken him to John Bonham in his sound, but I've studied both, and they don't play alike at all. And that's just simply by watching videos. If you watch Bonham in the end, like, Bonham got really good at like wrist work towards the end. He didn't, you know, flail around as much as he did in those early couple of years. Like, you watch him hit the snare in like 79 at the Nebworth show, and it's more of a kind of a wrist hit, versus Alex, where his whole career was just a snare hit that came from the middle of his back or something like that. And it makes sense why he is in the state that he's in, physically.
Right.
Just in the short time that I've spent trying to play like him, it's a physically demanding job. And anyways, the point of me saying this is that, like, I think a lot of people take the easy way out when it comes to tribute bands and covering the songs, because it really is more ergonomic to use your wrist to hit a hi-hat and then use your wrist for the second hit. But I think it's a big sacrifice to make if you're trying to sound like someone. People don't make those sacrifices with
I
Eddie.
think that Alex sounds like Bonham, and they seem to both play behind the beat. That's the only thing I really see in common with them. And it's funny because when I hear Jason Bonham, John Bonham's son, playing Alex, he's right on top of the beat to me. He doesn't sit back. You know what I mean? Alex always, and his father seemed like to just keep it's like the tides. You and I mentioned this before, Tanner. It's like the push and pull between Eddie and Alex is like almost like the tides, you know? It's like, and especially in the early days when they didn't, you know, because you and I also, we were talking, I was saying, man, I think they used a click track on like Pound Cake. And I think by then they were using it on pretty much everything. And then you went,
I think so,
and lined it up there. And you said Pound Cake is perfectly lined up. It you know, you could drop it on a timeline in there and it's perfect. So, I mean, I know they had reasons to do that, but it just seemed like everybody does this nowadays. Producers, everything's done to a click track, obviously, for when they're touring, for whatever, you know, if they're canning tracks and doing stuff like that, and with the light show and everything like that. So, but you know, I think in the earlier days, Van Halen there was no click track. I think it was more that push pull, and on those first, you know, for up to, you know, beyond 1984, I guess. Although, you know what, 5150, I don't know that they used a click track. Dreams would be one I'd be interested to see if they used a click track on. Obviously, Why Can't This Be Love, the OB8, but the OB8, the arpeggiator was not perfect time. It sped up. It actually sped up and slowed down. That's why when you listen to Why Can't This Be Love live in concert, the bass part sounds completely different, because I don't even think they're using the OB8 on that. I think they use that sequencer, and they programmed it separately into the sequencer, and we're only using the right hand part because being an analog keyboard, the arpeggiator on the OB8 did speed up and slow down. And I know that Love Walks In, which is amazing. It just tells you how great of a musician Eddie was. Alex overdubbed the drums to Eddie, because Eddie played the whole song by tapping his foot and playing the piano. Because when the chorus comes in, there's a little thing called a ritard, RITARD, not retard, and where Eddie actually, it's not in the same tempo as the verses. It slows down and builds up to go back into the verse. So it doesn't line up on a click. And and apparently Eddie played it like perfect, and Alex actually overdubbed his drums to Eddie just playing the piano on that song. So when next time you listen to that song, that's a feat that Eddie was able to play that whole song basically, and Alex was able to. But it also goes to show that that one brain thing that they shared, you know what I mean, that they locked in. And I guess from playing so long together, that it was like, even though they didn't play it live together, Alex, knew Eddie the way he was, and he was just able to just pull it off. It's actually pretty impressive when you listen to it. But
I've tempo aligned a lot of the early stuff to see. I mean, obviously not in order to see if there was a click track or not, because there really wasn't a such thing. Nor do they need it. But Alex sped fills up a lot. Like if you played a long fill, it would speed up almost up to 20 BPM faster, and it's just part of it. I think that's what, I mean, not to say that the 90s stuff was missing anything, but I think there was some stuff missing there. Yeah. That kind of natural magic that happens. And
can I just jump in, guys? I've just read a interesting comment here from Alan regarding Tanner and Conks being the rulers of the EVH Con, and
I don't know about
that. I do remember because we streamed a majority of that here live on the channel, and Tanner, you were on the drums for a lot of it, and there were a lot of great comments from people regarding the drumming that you were providing. I'm just thinking, John, out loud, with the advent of Alex's book coming out in October and EVH Con, I wonder if there might be an opportunity for EVH Con to be incorporating an Alex Van Halen sort of drum element, or exposition or something, some kind of discussion at EVH Con this year.
Well, I'm already planning my kit, assuming I'm drumming again, which I think, after the comments I heard last year, I think I probably will be. And I've been planning on because having the balance rig there was pretty insane. It was, we definitely were all there on the guitar department, and bass was kind of here and there. We had half the show. We had what's his name there, the really tall guy with the Jack Daniels bass.
Oh, Jeff.
Jeff brought his whole rig, but he left after a few songs, and then we kind of just used the PA and just bass into PA for the rest of it. But in my, I did my best to kind of get an Alex kind of drum rig set up, but I'd love to. I've been messing around with samples. I mean, I posted it on Facebook the other day, MIDI program samples with my electronic drums and triggering them through it. I'd love to be able to kind of set that up.
That should be your goal. That should be your goal, because those sounds are incredible. You know what? I always tell people when they ask me about Tanner, I always say, he's a savant. I mean, the kid is an amazing guitar player. Not only is that, but he when he immerses himself into something, he really gets into it, to the fact that he's become a seriously accomplished drummer that gets up there, and you saw him on the Howard Stern show playing Hot for Teacher on the drums with it was on Howard Stern. I mean, that's how proficient he's become that at this, because he took this dive into Alex's tones. And I mean, like I said, he just jumped in the deep end of the pool, and literally he plays incredibly well on the drums, and so he's the real deal. Tanner's definitely the real deal. So I urge everybody to check out his channel, and these videos are great about the drum. And let me tell you something. I told you one of those things. I don't know if it was a sample or whatever. I go, your drum sounded better than Alex's. That's how incredible on that one thing you sent me was. I was like, oh my gosh, this is insane. It's so good. So he definitely has it. And a lot of people have done this. I mean, I'm a guitar player, but I've been obsessed with that snare drum sound for 30 years now. And we used to try to get my friend at a studio, and we tried everything to try to, and I tell you, my nephew, he got thrown out of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Yeah. He said he went through the whole museum, and then he saw everything he wanted to see. Then he went to Alex's drum set, proceeded to climb behind it and sit down and take pictures from under the snare and everything where the tape was on it and everything like that, and where they soon escorted him off the property. But he's like, he was happy. I got what I wanted. He was laughing. He was like, I'm good. I got everything I wanted. And so a lot of people have been like, listen, Rick Beato, did he redo that video? Because I don't remember. I watched it again recently, unless it's a new version.
He reposted a YouTube short that had some like different stuff in it, and
yeah, it's much better now. Whatever he did now,
I think so. Yeah,
the first one was terrible. This one sounded much better this time around.
I think, yeah. I mean, he definitely did a little bit of research. I mean, he didn't have the rosewood snare and stuff like that, and a lot of my attempts have been considering what we know about Alex, what he said, what people have heard and stuff like that. But like, there's a lot of a lot of stuff that I've figured out in my own experiments that are not what people would expect. And I've gone all through stuff with you, and then obviously you sent stuff to your nephew, and got some. I like hearing opinions from people, because it's like, I don't know if I'm close or not, but there's certain things like the tuning of the bottom head of the snare and stuff like that. Generally, a lot of people just crank it. That's just what everyone does. You crank it, and it's like, I find there to be no coincidence that everyone cranks it and no one sounds like Alex. So that's kind of where I go. It's like, I'm going to do the opposite of what everyone's doing, and because most likely it's probably what was happening, because if no one else can do it and they're all doing the same thing, then let me try this. I'm always, that's the thing, is that like, I'm immersed because I really have nothing better to do. I mean, I work full-time job. I work a full-time job, and when I'm not working, I'm on YouTube and or Facebook. Like I literally look Van Halen up on YouTube and put the filter this week and just scroll through what's happened this week, just so I can interact, and not not be a dick, but I'd like, if someone has something that I could, inform them on or whatever, and I'd like, or even just conversations. I like conversations about the kind of stuff, in any regard, Alex and Eddie and Van Halen in general, but I just, I really have had nothing better to do than to just immerse myself in music in general. I mean, I record and play a lot more than Van Halen, but when you play Van Halen, you have to kind of put your whole energy into it, because Eddie and Alex were the most unique players in the whole world, and you can't go from playing Metallica to Van Halen without a little bit of practice. And the same thing goes with the drums. Like it's
well, don't get any other hobbies, all right? and a Fruitcake Tony, the drums on the intro to that Halenville, that's actually Alex Van Halen. I just sampled his snare and kick, and that's what that is. So that's why it sounds that way, because that's what it from For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. That's the kick and the snare from that. And I actually asked Alex. I only had a couple seconds to ask him about how do you get that snare sound, and all he would say to me is, "It's in the tuning." That's all he would say. It's in the tuning.
I took that quote and went and ran a marathon with it. I mean, that's literally my motto lately. Is like,
it's all in the tuning. That's what he said to me. It's all in the tuning.
And
Okay,
and
that's all we would give. And you
I
know
thought
what?
it was I thought it was a joke when you first told me, but like now that I'm actually, you know, getting closer and closer, I'm like, it really is. I mean, EQ does a whole lot and mic placement does a whole lot, but you know, it's the same thing with Eddie. It's not the mic placement. I mean, the mic placement will get you exactly the tone of this one song if you get it right, but it's not going to capture the character of the amp,
Right.
like the distortion of the amp. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that was kind of. I mean, like you said, you know, it sounds like a simple answer, but it's really, you know, it's really the truth in actuality. But I look forward to more of these videos. I can't wait for you to get them out there for everybody to hear.
Sure. Yeah,
There's
absolutely,
just
John.
not enough community of Alex. I think we mentioned this before, like, and I think, you know, this is a better time than ever to talk about Alex, being that like the auction just happened, which was really big, and the book's coming out, and
Yep.
he's really
I think
all
what,
that's
I
left
think what you
of.
have to do, Tanner, is you have to sort of graft Alex onto the Eddie Van Halen kind of stream or tree or vine or whatever, and I think that's where the initial sort of support's going to come, Kyle, from from the established Van Halen fans. And I'm going to say this, and I mean this respectfully, and there's a lot of comments in the chat supporting probably where I'm going to take this. A lot of Van Halen fans already are quite intricate with the details and quite concerned and want to know the details. So taking that mindset, Kyle, from the guitar perspective into sort of working out what Alex was doing with the drums is going to kind of come naturally for Van Halen fans anyway, John. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it goes hand in hand. Absolutely. That's why when people, you see people argue over these Sammy era and the Dave era and the songwriting credits. Michael Anthony didn't write anything. He shouldn't get any credit. Alex didn't write anything either. So why does he get, the credit? Well, Alex was more important than any of us will ever know to those creation of those songs, because all him and his brother did was let the 2-inch tape roll in there, and they just played and played and played. And then they went back and said, threw it on a cassette probably, or dad, and listened in their car, and, oh, Ed, that part was really cool here. We got to use this for something. And then they say, oh, well, that part goes with this part. We could put this together with this. That could be the bridge. And this, and that's how those songs were really born,
100%. 100%. There would have been lots of times, Kyle, where Alex sort of said, there's a song here. There's a song here with this riff, Yeah, 100%. I'm beyond any stretch of doubt. I believe that's exactly, he's identified something and gone back, and then they've gone and taken that, obviously, to the songwriters that they've had and said, here's the music.
There's proof in just listening to Ed without Alex. I mean, he does well. He did well, in the few performances he did. Like the SNL one, I think was probably my favorite. But there's always something missing, and even when you hear people make Van Halen style songs or whatever on YouTube, like they don't put enough effort into the drums, whether it be just stock MIDI, MIDI drums or whatever. And so it's like you're missing at least 50% of it.
Absolutely.
And part of this journey is like I just talked to Martin Smith there, that the British guy there who does the Eddie Van Halen kind of tone stuff earlier, about being happy to either one send him samples from my drums for kind of Alex Van Halen's sounding drums, but also I'd love to just drum, but like for a 15-second intro, I'd love to just send over the drums for him. John and I have made some short tracks and stuff like that just for fun or whatever. And it's like, a lot of people miss that. I think a big guy in the Van Halen community, I think he goes by like Liquid Charlie or something like that. He's all over Facebook and YouTube and stuff. Like, great player, great tones, but I always find, and I think he doesn't intentionally, I think he doesn't try to shoot for the exact like Van Halen sound, but without that snare, it's like what is this? This isn't Van Halen. Like
Well,
it's
listen to all this stuff from the Wildlife with the Lindrum machine, and then
Yeah.
when you hear Ripley, like, and you
Yeah.
hear that, it's like that's the one everybody gravitated to. I remember when I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, man, this sounds so much better. And back then I was like 16, and then when I realized, I go, oh, that's because that's the
Yeah.
drums, that's Alex, you know what I mean, on there.
all the Lindrum stuff just sounds like ZZ Top Eliminator. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
literally the album that came out exactly when he was recording that stuff. So it makes sense, but it's like,
Yeah.
it is kind of funny. I actually just ordered the Wildlife off of Amazon and watched it and stuff just so I could hear all the soundtrack, the stuff that hasn't made its way to YouTube yet, like
Right.
like the Right Now keyboard kind of whatever Fender Rhodes kind of stuff. That's kind of cool. And
Yeah.
but yeah, it's such an important part, and I think like especially actually something I didn't mention is like that the producer of Van Halen 3 coming out recently and saying that Alex didn't play on any of Van Halen 3, and now there's like this massive Alex Van Halen fan, not whatever Van Halen fan debate, especially in whatever Turd Ferguson's videos. Like every comment, he's posted all of the Van Halen 3 ones, and every comment section in there is like, I think this is Alex, I think this is Eddie, and I think there are a lot of. I think there are equal amount of songs on that album that were Eddie as there was Alex. But yeah,
you can tell. I think you can tell very, very easily.
Same here.
Alex is playing,
It's hard for me not to just like give my 2 cents all the time. That's like, really, you guys can't like you can't tell. But some people are so hardwired to just hear interviews and just go, like, that's the truth. That's the truth, and you can't tell me anything otherwise.
That's what drives me crazy about Diver Down. Everybody hates Diver Down. They hate Diver Down because Eddie said he hated Diver Down. Did Eddie say he hated Diver Down when it came out? No, Eddie was very happy with Diver Down when it came out. But
Alex hates it too. Alex hates Diver Down too.
Yeah, because that was the power struggle between Roth and Templeman and Eddie and Alex, and it came to a head on that album. But you know what? I don't care what anybody says. That album might be the most Van Halen album of any Van Halen of the original 6, and people might say I'm crazy, but I mean that because that's the album where their personalities shine through on that. You knew Roth with Big Bad Bill and that kind of stuff, that that was his personality. That's what he brought to that band, that kind of thing. And then you listen to Hang 'em High, and that's what Eddie and Alex brought to that band. And then you put those two together, and that was Van Halen. You know what I mean? And Michael Anthony, he doesn't get enough credit. He basically sang lead vocals on Pretty Woman. If you listen to it, he's singing the whole song, the harmony, everything that Dave is singing, he's singing the harmony to it. So
yeah,
it's basically the lead vocal. They're both singing lead vocals on that song, So
that's what's crazy about Eddie too, is like just the fact that he left such a big footprint. That these fantastic musicians didn't really get their credit as far as the public eye, because he was just such a big shadow that was cast.
Right.
But like you said, if you go back and you deep dive into the albums, it's like those albums aren't those albums without a Michael Anthony, without an Alex Van Halen, without David Lee Roth, without Sammy. They each brought their own flavor. And I think that's why Van Halen has stood the test of time, because they were never afraid of change. They always stayed true to who they were as musicians, but they weren't afraid of change. And that's why their music, you could just tell over the years, it was constantly always changing. At the end of the day, at the root, they were still Van Halen. Yeah. But that's why they stood the test of time and still get fans to this day, because you can just look at any of their eras of music and they all bring something different to the table.
It's true. And
they were who they were because of each other. Like, if Ed recorded every album with a Lindrum, Van Halen wouldn't be Van Halen. It's just a fact. If Ed recorded with any other drummer, for that matter, that he didn't have a sort of spiritual connection with, they wouldn't have never gone probably farther than a couple cities over.
They are the epitome of catching lightning in a bottle. They everything just hit right on all cylinders.
Yeah, it's like the atoms and everything, that whole band just collided at the right time. You know what I mean?
Planets aligned.
Yeah. But I
The
think
bat
that
was made
Alex,
in the natural, everything.
yeah, right. I think Alex, people are starting to realize now that Eddie's gone, and Tanner, you can elaborate on this. That Alex never got the credit he deserved. When they say, "Oh yeah, he's the top 25 rock drummers of all time," I think Alex is way better. I mean, maybe I'm just biased, but I think people are starting to realize. I mean, Eddie overshadowed him, and people. Oh, well, you can't have two greatest, guitar playing drummers of all time. Eddie's the greatest guitar player. Alex is a really good drummer, but I think that he's criminally overlooked when it comes to the greatest rock drummers of all time. I think he's one of the top rock drummers of all
And
time.
he's one of the few drummers that actually has his own tone.
Absolutely.
I feel like once you get past a certain point, they all start kind of sounding almost repetitive and the same. I mean, you can do the same thing with guitars. There are so many as well, but it's like, drummers, that niche isn't quite as big as what Guitar World is. So
yeah, that's very telling. Like that, I won't even say his own tone, his own voice. Like certain guys, who they are by just like 2 seconds.
His own groove.
They have their own voice. Eddie had his own voice. Always knew that it was him. Just like a singer from their voice. Certain drummers, you could tell who they were by.
And he knew that too. I mean, there's an interview in '83 that Alex name drops like 4 or 5 drummers where he's just like, love the sound of Neil Peart's toms, but I hate the sound of his snare and kick. Love the sound of so-and-so's, or love the sound of Billy Cobham's playing, but I hate the sound of his drums and all. And it's like he loved all that music, but he shot for a sound in the same exact way Eddie shot for us. And they were both neurotic. I said Eddie was neurotic. Alex was just as neurotic, like when it came to, and it was funny to hear Sammy and Michael say it when they dropped the box set last year or this year or whatever. They did the whole video on for unlawful carnal knowledge, and they said Alex was chasing the John Bonham snare sound. And what I find funny is that I can't point to too many tracks where Alex's snare sounds like John. And if you glaze over Led Zeppelin in general and glaze over Van Halen in general, maybe you'd say that, but nothing on the Physical Graffiti album sounds anything like Alex Van Halen's ever recorded. It's, I find a few cases. I was talking to Jerry Leica the other day because he's been, drumming and setting up his drums and stuff like that. And we've been talking about Alex, and it's just there's a few tracks like Stairway to Heaven, I think is a track where I think I hear some Alex in it, and so a lot of the live stuff, I think it's 1975, the live Zeppelin album. I think that sounds a lot like something Alex could have picked up or whatever. And Eddie and Alex were big live album guys. A lot of those covers they did in the club days were covers of the live album versions of those songs, and the proof is that they played. Whatever band played them differently. A good example would be Walk Away by James Gang. When they played that live, they played an entirely different intro than the studio version, which was only on the live version. So when you hear Van Halen covering the whole intro, it's oh, they were listening to that one obscure live James Gang album. And it's the fact that they even had that record, much less learned it, is pretty funny. But yeah, like you said, Alex is just criminally underrated. I think in every instrument, I think there's always the two schools of people that care for more technical technique and being exactly on grid kind of thing. And I think a lot of modern drummers play like that. And I think a good example of that would be Neil Peart. I love Rush, love Neil, but I just cannot really I can't really get with that drum style, because it's I can program that on MIDI. There's not a whole lot of swing, there's not a whole lot of feel. He's an amazing drummer and very innovative, but you can't program John Bonham or Alex Van Halen on MIDI. Like, it's impossible. I've done it. I've tried it. I've done it. Even if you have the exact samples of every drum, you know, trying to recreate the John Bonham or Alex Van Halen kind of feel swing thing is just like, it's just as difficult as spending your whole drum career trying to play like Neil Peart, you know, just really fast stuff or whatever, fills and this and that, drum solos and stuff. I just think I'm more in that school of inconsistency, but not in like a big, you know, beginner level. Like, I like the push and pull of tempo. I like that stuff, kind of stuff. It's more impressive to me when someone can play without a click and stuff like that, and still stay, you know, perfect time or whatever you call it, like not sloppy. I think like the lightning in the bottle aspect of Van Halen came from the fact that they recorded live. They're one of the very few bands that recorded live almost their entire career. Even in the eras where it was more processed, like there's, you know, Ed didn't go back and re-record his guitars and double track, and like, you know, there's some cases, you know, Pound Cake has like has the 12 strings overlaid on it and stuff like that, which is really just a textural layer. But ultimately, every song started with the basic track, cut live, maybe two takes put into one, but you know.
Good point, John. And I think that's something that we got to bear in mind too. You know, that's an outstanding fact there. That, you know, to the uneducated rock and roll fan, to the normal everyday fan, Kyle, and you know, I'm sure you work with them, and you've got that normal, you know, that everyday fan, rock and roll fan. Bonzo and Alex Van Halen would sound exactly the same. You know, I get that. I get that argument because
I get it too. Don't get me wrong.
I was one of those guys too once upon a time. You know, you couldn't sort of tell the differences, but when you get a little bit more entrenched and you understand a little bit more, and also, John, when you listen to these albums 50 million times too, you know, let's not take that away too, Kyle. How many times have you listened to Balance in over the years?
To the point, I think, where I would have calluses physically on my hands from putting CDs in, or you know, hitting volume more. Probably it's probably where the calluses came from, the tips of my fingers more than actually playing. Yeah, I mean, like you guys said, just get entrenched in this stuff. I mean, it's like I said, you can go as far as you want to go, and fortunately and unfortunately, it just becomes more and more addictive, because it's like watching a movie a bunch of different times. You start seeing all these different subtleties of things that maybe you didn't notice before, that maybe added to the plot, or, you know, there's something said that led to something else, you know, no different than a lyric or a tone here, or, you know, a harmonic played there. Or then you start learning more about theory, and then you start breaking it down from that realm. You're just like, wow, you start to see the genius of actual musicianship. Just, you start going down to the rabbit hole of all of a sudden, you know, scales, and it's literally never ending. And I think that's why we all stick with it as much as we do, because there's still always constantly something to learn. Even to this day, even after Eddie, you know, unfortunately being gone, we're still learning from him, still talking about him, you know, and fortunately still able enough to even have, you know, Sammy, you know, and Michael Anthony around playing to get ready to go on their tour and this and that. So it's
we should
still
talk
great
about
to see
that
them at
soon
their age
too.
doing it.
Yeah,
we should talk about that too, because I'm just looking at the time.
Really quick, Jeff E. was Hot for Teacher intro really a car engine? No, most definitely it wasn't. The Simmons drums, that's it.
Yeah.
Ted Templeman totally forgot how.
I'll just explain it quickly. They recorded Eddie's Lamborghini, and that is featured on Panama. That is what you hear in the breakdown of Panama. Ted Templeman, years later, is interviewed by Greg, and mistakenly attributes that recording to Hot for Teacher. He's been interviewed alternatively in a matter of 10 years as Greg, and said the complete opposite. He said Alex came up with the Simmons thing, he liked it, everyone liked it, it was cool, and it was cut, whatever. And I've gotten confirmation from Chris Gill, who talked to Alex or talked to Eddie mostly, but I believe he said he got confirmation from Alex once that it was just all Alex on drums. And at this point, there's no debate.
Yeah.
And any guy that actually knows cars, I personally don't, but when I put up my video on it, there was like 10 car guys that were just like, if your Lamborghini Miura sounds like that, get it fixed. Because that's not what it sounds like. That's what a 1950s Harley sounds like.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly right. I actually, I think we may have discussed it, but I believe when they recorded, they wanted to use it on something. I think they originally wanted to use that on Jump.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
he said, Eddie said that like he didn't know yet, and he's like, originally it was gonna be like Jump, and then you hear like the whoosh,
yeah,
or whatever. But
worked out well.
History is history.
I think one of the interesting things about drums and the way that it's important for rock and roll guys, and I just want to sort of end up this part of the show so that we can talk about the upcoming Sammy show, if that's okay. Kyle, on the channel once a week we do ranking the tracks, and we take a rock album, for example, and we deep dive it and we talk about it. And one thing that I've noticed consistently with great producers, Tanner, and I'm sure you've come across this too, is the amount of effort and time they take to get the drum sound important. You know, some of the great rock and roll albums that we've ever listened to over the years have been backed up by the days, the hours, and sometimes the weeks the engineering and the production staff have taken to mic and set up a drum kit, a drum rig. It's phenomenal. So
it's directly proportional. The amount of time and the whatever you call it, energy into the drum sound is directly proportional to the quality of an album, the sound of an album, in my opinion.
I believe when all these guys are making albums, it's like something that most average fans don't think about. They have production meetings, pre-production meetings, and they discuss what the production sound they want on this album to be like. They have definite ideas. I was on Tony's show. We interviewed Mike Frazier, who mixed Balance. Right. And I asked Mike, I was asking him about that. And he said he was there early on in Balance before he didn't engineer the album, but he was there early on when they were getting drum sounds, he told me. And so he spent time with Alex, miking up the drums, and Alex, that sound that they want. Listen to like 1984, that has a definite production sound. They definitely, every album, I feel like they went in, and it wasn't just like they said, okay, just throw a few mics there and let's just go. No, they're like, I'm sure, hey, this is what we want Van Halen to sound like at this point in our career on this record. This is where we're at with my tone and the guitar and Alex's drum sound. And
the same thing went live too. The same thing went for the live show. I've heard guys say like, I've said, why did they put a mic on the side of Alex's snare on this album or whatever? And I've heard people, comment and talk to me and say, sound guys are insane. And it's like, why is it on every single show for I don't think people realize how much say Eddie and Alex. I mean, Eddie was setting his own mics. You watched the beginning of the show that came out last year, Donington. The beginning of the show, you see Eddie setting up his own mics on the cabinets on the stage, and there's pictures of him in the '79 tour doing the same thing, setting up his own mic. Like they had a lot of say, and I want 2 overheads on the drums, and I want each mic on or internal miking or all that stuff. Like it wasn't just the sound guy take over and force them to deal with it. Like
and that's a good point. And I think we also have to take into account too that some of the happy accidents that have happened in rock and roll. I remember when we were doing the Rumours album and we were doing some research on that, and I was blown away because the producer of that great album's come out with a thick book, and he talks about everything that we love as guitar and music fans. He's telling you what microphones they use. The guy knew everything. And he was talking about how for 2 weeks he was trying to set up the drum sound for Mick Fleetwood. And the rest of the band was sort of standing around this hotshot guy called Ken, this hotshot producer, and saying, when are we going to get, what's going on? It wasn't until John McVie was in there playing bass with Mick Fleetwood that the producer realized I'm mixing the drums independently. I'm engineering the drums. I'm doing the production for the drums independently. I can't do that. I've got to do that with the bass player together, and that's how they got the magic. So, you know, it's that human element that we're talking about for so long in the show of Eddie and Alex. You know,
absolutely.
That element.
But obviously the producers, they brought Andy Johns in there for a reason, because of the drum sound. They built the new drum room.
Oh yeah,
they wanted that British production sound. It's like, you know, I always say, listen to the Eagles or even Fleetwood Mac, and this, I'm talking about the late 70s Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah,
listen to the Eagles and listen to them, and to me, I hate the way the drums sound. It's that California drum sound. They're very dry, like cardboard, not ambient at all. They're all cardboard boxes. And then you go to Great Britain, and the sounds like Led Zeppelin and bands like that, where it was ambient and big, and, you know, and high ceiling stone castles, and, you know, and stairwells and things like that. And you know what? And you listen to those albums today, and they still sound, you know, phenomenal. That was,
you hear that in early Van Halen. I think Don Landy was so. I tell this to everyone that doesn't know. Like,
I know what you're gonna say.
Don Landy was used to recording Doobie Brothers and Little Feat and stuff, like bands that had like a ton of that 70s, like you know, yacht rock kind of muffled, taking heads off of drums, baffling everything off, you know, putting tape on cymbals, like all that stuff. And that sounds great in a Doobie Brothers song, but, you know, when you force if someone was to force John Bonham to take the heads off of his drums, like, he probably would have killed him, but
yeah.
Like, imagine.
I'm sure Jimmy Page would have asked him nicely. He would have done anything Jimmy asked him to do, but that's a whole separate show. And when we get Led Zeppelin, when we're talking about Led Zeppelin, we've got to get Alan Garber on, because you know, that's a rule we've made. Any Led Zeppelin, we've got to include Alan. Hey guys, just quickly before we wind the show up, the Sammy tour that's coming up. I'm John. Do you want to kick this part of the show off? So you know, you've got some thoughts and impressions.
Sure. Yeah, they're like 5 or 6 shows into it already, and they played here in Connecticut the night before. Or was it last night? Maybe, I don't know. It was the night before last. I didn't get a chance to see them because a bunch of reasons, but one of them is the traffic was backed up for like 3 hours into Connecticut from New York. So, but a friend of mine went, and he actually told me, and he's a big rock guy. He loves Van Halen, but he loves all kinds of rock. But he told me that he said that may have been the greatest concert I ever went to. And I'm telling you, this guy is like he goes to a lot of shows, and I've known him for 30 years. And I was shocked when he said that. He goes, it was that good. And Joe Suma even said, Joe Suma is very, you know, he didn't go out of his way. He said Satriani was serviceable. That's what he said. But he said Sammy Hagar and Michael Anthony, he said, were phenomenal.
Wow.
He said they were that good. And, you know, Sammy's going to be 77. And listen, he wisely, they brought a keyboard player to play with them live. And the guy sings amazingly well, because you hear the harmonies and the background vocals, and they sound great. And Sammy's even said, you know, some things, it gives me a breather. You know what I mean? I let him sing because his voice is like, he can sing in my range. So he's singing some of the background vocals, and it helps me out so I don't blow my voice out, you know. But I mean, and like I said to you guys earlier before we came on, I said, you know, I like a couple of things I had heard from Satch. You know, he goes out of his way to make sure that he plays what he has to play in the solos to connect with people. The Eddie, you know, like Eddie. But then he goes off and says, you know, I'm not going to try to just be an Eddie copy. I'm Joe Satriani, and I'm gonna, you know, these are fun songs, and I'm gonna do what I would do in a solo in this song too, which I kind of appreciate that, because it's like you can't replace Eddie. We know that, so it's like, you know. And my only gripe about the whole tour is I hate when people call it Sammy's Eddie tribute tour. This Eddie tribute tour. It's never was. Sammy has never said this is an Eddie tribute tour. He's never said that. He's very careful not to say that, because I guess he feels, listen, if they ever wanted to do a tribute thing, his brother and his son, they would have done that, or would do that. all we're doing is celebrating the music of my career. And the biggest part of my career was the 11 years I was in Van Halen. And this time we're going to go heavy on that. And I'm going to have Joe come and play because, we love Joe. And Sammy said that he spent, I think, $1.25 or $1.5 million on the production, on the video screens and on that. So, and I also heard Eddie Trunk said, that it was, he was at something in California, in LA. I forget what it was, he said. And he said he was talking to some people in the industry, and they was asking him, what are the big tours of the summer? And they mentioned that this is one of the hottest tours of the whole summer, the Sammy tour. So, and but I'm telling you, everything I've seen from people whose opinion I trust is that it's really just a great night, a celebration of all that great music. So
I got tickets on August 9th out here in Vegas. I cannot wait.
Yeah.
I cannot wait for that. And I think Rob
Johnson, sounds good.
Rob's there tonight. Rob Johnson.
I saw him for tonight.
Yeah.
But I saw Sammy last year. Because earlier this year, last year, he was out here in Vegas with the Circle, and they played like Right Now. They played a lot of Van Halen, and I was surprised, to be honest. I thought they was going to go more like Montrose, maybe a couple of Van Halen songs here and there. And he and Sammy were, or Sammy and Michael Anthony, they were both already just plastered. But I will say that was the most hospitable show I've ever seen. Like literally, Sammy signed anything throughout the entire show, never stopped, and was just singing right on key, signing things for kids and this and that, pouring tequila for people right in their mouths. I mean, it was definitely a really cool experience, and to get to hear finally, because I didn't get to see the 2004 reunion tour with Sammy and Eddie and all them. So to get to finally see Michael Anthony and Sammy before I died, before they're gone, whoever else lives there, whoever. But, like just to get to see them then, and then now with, to see Joe Satriani and, all that flack that he was catching on the Howard Stern show or whatever else.
Unfairly. He was in a bad position because you know what?
Put on the spot. You're like, hey,
exactly.
You can play with sax. I'm like, who goes into it cold turkey? I'm like,
they're all in a horrible position, and I really give it to them because ever since the Howard Stern show, I honestly think people want them to fail just so they can yell at them because, once the first few set lists are let out, everyone goes, it's all Sammy Hagar songs. Where's all the Roth era songs? Yeah. And it's like, as soon as they play a Roth era song, someone's going to comment, that sounds horrible. So it's like, people just want them to play Mean Street and butcher it just so they can yell at them and say, you screwed it up. I feel so bad for them because they're like, no matter what, they're going to get yelled at. And from what I've heard, all the songs they play sound pretty good. The only thing I have heard and I agree with from what I've seen is that a lot of the stuff's too slow.
Yes.
I just wish they would speed it up. I just wish they'd speed it up just a little bit because 100%. when you tune down this whole step like what they're doing, which I have no gripe with that, allows them all to sing comfortably and stuff. You gotta either keep it at the speed or make it even a little faster
because dropping it that full step, it makes it sound like a dinosaur plodding along already. And then when you have the tempos slow, they really need to.
I did it myself. I took someone's YouTube video and I put it you can do the custom speed. Just put it on 1.1 speed. Literally, that's all the difference. And it's like, wow, it sounds so much better. And it's of course it's all great still, but
that's a good point, Tanner.
If Jason's playing with a click or not.
That's a good point because a couple of days ago, a friend of mine sent me a link of Duran Duran. They're touring at the moment, and I love John Taylor as a bass player, one of the greatest bass players ever. And I was listening to a recent version of them singing or playing Rio. And, the bass track on Rio is just phenomenal. And they're doing it. They're playing it slower because obviously these guys are older now. Clearly, they're older. But it just doesn't sound, again, I'm not being critical, but it's just not the sound of what it was, when they're playing it at normal speed. But I get the reason why. And again, I think we have to be sort of, what's the word?
Objective.
Subjective to the fact, too, that we're listening to this not in a live situation.
True.
And
Yeah.
when you're in a live situation, you're getting caught up in that whole emotion and that whole energy. So you're probably not going to pick it up too much, as opposed to sitting down watching a YouTube clip of these guys in their 60s trying
I
to
think
play
it's more
a
so
song.
for the experience too, just because I mean they're not going to
Correct.
be around, you know, much longer. So it's like you just gotta be in the no different than going on vacation to the beach after you've been working for years. First vacation you've had, you just gotta close your eyes and just take it in, you know, for what it is.
Yeah,
absolutely. You know what? And so, you know, most of us don't have. I never had a problem with them doing this because I always said Sammy wrote these songs, you know, too. So he's got a right to play them. You know what I mean? So if he wants to do that, I just didn't want them to call it any kind of tribute because it's not. And you know what? People should go see it because this might be the last time you ever get to see those songs in a big amphitheater or arena at that kind of volume with two of the original players and two other guys who are very well accomplished and very, you know, respected musicians too. So
Christopher Lapsawa, they the Roth songs they're playing on this tour are the Roth songs they played when Sammy was in the band. Ain't Talking About Love,
Panama,
Jump, and Panama, which it was in the early days there. They played the Roth album songs, which Sammy really didn't like, but in those early days, the trade-off was if they got a Roth song, Sammy got one of his own songs. So that's why you have songs like There's Only One Way to Rock and Can't Drive 55, and then Eagles Fly came a little bit later and stuff like that.
Montrose songs.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, Sammy has had experience playing those songs, and Michael sings Ain't Talking About Love anyways. Entirely.
And he did give a shout out to Eddie when he sang it out here in Vegas. He said, "We love you, Eddie," right before he went into Ain't Talking About Love.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which I thought was really cool, you know, on his part, considering, you know, all the drama behind all that story for a different time. But I mean, he's always been a class act, that guy.
Sammy said the other day that he said, you know, Panama, he goes, the first time, he goes, I was pissed the first time I heard that song because it was so good that it's like, man, why didn't I write that song, man? Because there's a couple songs, he goes, and he said the same thing with Jump. He goes, man, he goes, he was pissed when he heard those songs. And so he said the other day, he said, I love Panama. He goes, I know it's not my song. He goes, but that song, I just think it's one of the great, and it really is for a lot of people. If you were going to point to one song, you know, you might say Unchained or something like that. What is the Van Halen? So if I want to get into Van Halen, Panama is it's still
pretty good start.
One of my favorite Van Halen. It's my a top 3 for me. I love Panama. I think it's just a great song.
Well, think about
we played it twice at EVH Con.
That's right.
We played it twice at EVH Con, and I had no problem doing it because I don't know, it's such a great song from start to finish, and I love that they wear their kind of influences on their sleeve on that song without it being like complete ripoff. I mean, it's very AC/DC inspired, but
it definitely is.
A lot of the Sammy stuff is AC/DC kind of inspired. I mean, what's the last track on OU812 there with the
Down Payment Blues, Sucker.
Or not the last one. The
Apolitical Blues.
No, Sucker in a 3-piece.
Sucker in a 3-piece. That one is like
Down Payment Blues. It's the same song.
Change the vocalist and it's AC/DC.
Listen to the progression and the modulations in Down Payment Blues. You'll know it. You'll hear it right away. If you go look it up, if you don't know it already, go look it up.
Yeah,
Down
I love that. I like that album.
And you can see exactly where Sucker in a 3-piece came from. And while we're talking about that song, I don't know if Alan's still here or not, but I can't believe that's somebody else responded to my YouTube comment on that, on Sucker in a 3-piece, and they agreed with me 100%. They said, oh my gosh, I was thinking the same thing. I don't know how that could be a plexi on that song. It just does. It's just way more gainy than anything else on the rest of the album. I think it's weird. So anybody has any thoughts? I know it wasn't the Soldano at that point, but it just sounds very gainy compared to the rest of the record, you know?
Well, he experimented with amps then too, right before the Soldano, because he had heard about a Soldano, you know, through the channel of other people, and then called him up and was just like, hey, you got, you know, that one. I think he said the receipt he bought like 3 or something like that. So
he was using modern plexis at that point too. I mean, 5150, I believe, I believe from what Alan told me there's a Rudy Lear interview and stuff like that, which kind of like hinted at the fact that in the studio he was starting to use more. And I think Z Clark even said the same thing. Like, I don't think he was using the plexi the main plexi. I think that much. I think I don't think 5150 was that. I mean, that some of that stuff on that album is so like saturated and stuff like that, and not saturated in like like the kind of wild, inconsistent way of the earlier albums. It's got that kind of like not the same thing, but like how 5150s are very predictable.
Yeah.
A lot of compression, but
Well, the song 5150, I'm pretty sure he played the Flying V on that.
Yeah, it's a Flying V.
Well, so that had PAFs in it, which were like with a negative 8.5K, those pickups. So they weren't hot at all. And to make them bite like that, I mean, like that, you had to have a gainy kind of amp,
to switch from the Flying V with like, fairly low output 50s pickups to the Steinberger with like, hot active pickups in it and have it sound relatively similar is crazy. And I think, there was
no
obviously
how
some
much
studio
he was using back then too.
Yeah.
Between mix stage and whatever he had from his MXR EQ pedal, I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah. But the other thing about the tour is it's I know they're going to Japan in September, and they're going to be getting more offers to tour other places too. So I think this tour is going to go for quite a while. I don't know how long Satch is going to stay on it. I don't know. I'm sure he wants to do his own thing, but I know that it's going to continue. I think they're going to ride it out because I think they're even surprised at how successful it is.
I think
it's curious to see if he comes back to Vegas for a residency, because he always has a residency at the Stratosphere. I mean, granted, much smaller scale. Yeah, because Sammy always does a residency every year at the Stratosphere. His tickets are super expensive, like $600, but it's a really small venue. Highly recommend it. Go see it. But usually that's what he would do. No different than David Lee Roth did his last leg of his going away thing over here in Vegas too. So I'm thinking he might open up some more shows, because Vegas is the entertainment capital of the world, especially with the Sphere and everything else we're getting down here. So I mean, it's kind of like it's the final stop for a lot of people.
And it may be Sammy's last tour ever too. I mean, from watching his performance, he's doing great, but it's a struggle. And I think this may be his farewell tour without it being called the farewell tour.
Well, Vegas would make a lot of sense if they just did a because I think it's much easier on him there to take a day off in between. And he doesn't have to travel, no travel. You just go into your big suite in a nice hotel, and
he got several restaurants down here where he can just get his tequila and do whatever he wants to do. I mean, it's all readily available at his fingertips. Not that it's not already with the money that he's got.
Yeah,
I think
that makes perfect sense that he'd be doing that, and we wish them well, because rock and roll now is about for a lot of us older guys, about these older guys out there still celebrating it. We were talking about it earlier in the green room. We can't knock these guys performing still, because look at the Rolling Stones, one of the founders of modern rock and roll, still out there touring. Mick Jagger celebrated his 80th birthday or something like that only a couple of and they're not going to retire anytime soon.
Yeah,
it's amazing. It's incredible.
It's literally timeless music. Like, I literally tell people too, I think about like Justin Timberlake. I'm like, imagine him at 88 singing "I'm Bringing Sexy Back" up on stage.
Yeah,
I say it's not going to age well.
No, it's not. No, and I had a couple of friends of mine send me some memes of Angus, recently a couple of weeks ago, running around on stage, and I had a look, and the first thing I looked at Angus, my gosh, you've gotten old, man. But he's still out there, still running around, still, and from a young guy's perspective, when I was young getting into rock and roll, you sort of like, wow, these guys are great, they're giants. And, clearly, here's another guy, Kyle, that's not going to give up. He's just going to continue doing it. If you don't like it, Don't watch it. If you don't want to hear it, see you later.
Well,
Off you go.
And that's
I
and
agree
that's
with-
all these guys know too. I mean, music it's their lifestyle, it's their livelihood. I mean, it's what keeps them going, and it's no different than when you get older. You know, you die faster when you stop moving. When you keep going,
Yeah.
that's what's going to keep you going. So,
Yeah.
guys, I hope to be in half the shape that they're in at their age. My God.
And that's the weirdest thing I see. I mean, I just saw a comment in this show saying, you know, Sammy's look, you know, this is Sammy's Look at Me tour or whatever, and it's like, it's Sammy's tour. I don't know what else is it supposed to be. I don't understand the mentality where it's like these people are allowed to tour, they're allowed to be in a show. It's their one and only job. What is Sammy supposed to just start working at In-N-Out or something like that? Like.
My dad would always tell me, like, people are always going to find fly shit on paper. You know, like they're always going to find the smallest thing and just.
I think the reason they're doing the Roth era songs on this tour is to represent Michael Anthony's era, original era of Van Halen. So Satriani's doing his Satch Boogie. They're really not. I guess Jason, they're not doing any kind of Led Zeppelin this time. I know they played.
That is surprising, actually.
They played When the Levee Breaks when I saw them one time, the Circle, a few years ago at Jones Beach.
Oh.
And yeah, it was cool because Vic had the double neck, like the red double neck, the like pay. It sounded. I have a clip of it. I'll send it to you on my phone, Andrew. I'll send it to you. It was actually pretty cool. But
they should play Rock and Roll because obviously Van Halen did Rock and Roll Live Without a Net. Like that would make a lot of sense. I don't know if Jason can pull it off. That's a really, really technical, well, not technical, but just repetitive, hard song. But it would be nice. I mean, they've changed the set list a bit, I think, throughout the last 6 shows a little bit. I think they're going to play some different stuff. So
Sammy said they're going to add. They tried it in rehearsals, but it didn't work. But they're going to try Love Walks In and Can't Stop Loving You because that was a big hit in Japan apparently, and so they're going to be working on it here before it goes to Japan. So they'll probably play it. I would think before this tour ends over here, or this part
that Japan tour is going to be big money for them. That's a big.
Bet.
I hope
Big
they have
money.
like guests. Sammy talked about guests coming on. A lot of people have said like it's not going to happen. I mean, people go so far or initially to say, you know, Wolfgang and even Roth, which there was all that stupid kind of argument over that, I think. But you know, it'd be nice to see some, you know, even like Nuno. That would be really cool to see like Nuno. But then again, people say like, is Satch really going to let someone else like come up on stage and blow him? I mean, especially Nuno. Like Nuno is going to come up and blow Satch out of the water when it comes to Van Halen. So you know, we'll see. I mean, I think the problem is that everyone got their hopes up way too high with some of Sammy's initial comments, and I think that's why there's misunderstandings of what this tour really is. And if people just change their kind of outlook on it, I think they would appreciate it more.
They had the singer from Train, Pat from Train. He got up and sang with them the other night. I don't know if he did When It's Love or something like that. Yeah, he sounded really good with them too. Yeah. So he was that was in Saratoga, upstate New York. They did that.
Just so long as it's not Lady Gaga or Taylor Swift.
No.
Well, Taylor Swift is the new Eddie Van Halen. Haven't you heard?
Right. Yeah, she's the greatest guitarist ever. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Hey guys, it's been really cool hanging out with you. We're up to 2.5 hours. Kyle, quick 2.5 hours, bro. And we hardly got to speak and talk about everything that we had planned. Come back on for another show, bro. We don't do these regularly. We do them intermittently, but we've got a few ideas coming up, and we like to get a couple of other guys on as well. We normally have Jimmy joining us as well, and another guy too called Les Paul. But because we got you on and we wanted Tanner to have a big opportunity to talk about his drumming, we've just had the 4 of us. But we'll organise something, won't we, John?
Yes, we
coming
will.
up.
Like I said, I appreciate the time. I appreciate you getting back and reaching out and having me at all. Like I said, super humble. I've been watching you guys for a long time, so it's more surreal for me than probably what you realize me being on here right now.
Well, no problem. And it's a pleasure, and we'll definitely get you back on. And we've included, again, if you are watching on a replay, please, and some folks do, which is really, really humbling and great for us at the 2.5 hour mark, I've included Tanner's YouTube link for you to go and subscribe and check out what Tanner's doing, and also Kyle's wet, dry, wet videos. I encourage you to go and check out. He's got some great gear videos on there. A review of an Axis guitar, some good stuff. So please subscribe to these guys because that's the least we can do. When you're watching video channels, make sure you subscribe to the channel you're watching. It doesn't cost you a thing. Just hit that subscribe button and it helps that channel. The sooner we can get these guys up to 1,000 subscribers, that's when things start rolling and start happening for Tanner. Well, Tanner, you're past 1,000. So
Yeah, just
Kyle,
recently.
yeah, congratulations, bro.
Thank you.
So we'll share your links on our social media links as well too, Colin, and help get you up there, bro. It's the least we can do.
Yeah.
And comment, because I'm really bored.
I'm happy.
And comment. And we got Bent Tom in here.
Hey, Tom.
John, do you mind if I get you to do the last shout out, bro? Can you do that for us? Is that
Sure.
okay?
Oh, we got Johnny Heartbreaker, Ben Tom, Christopher Live Sour. Thanks for hanging, guys. Fruitcake Tony, Alan Garber, of course. Let's see. Anybody else I missed? John ZD351. Thanks for popping up there a lot tonight. A lot of great comments. JG, Jeff E, Gretch Zeppelin. Who's dressed better behind the drums, Bonzo or Alex Van Halen?
I go with Bonzo, but
Gotta be
pretty equal.
Jerry Leica, the great, the legend, Jerry Leica. Let's see, who else?
Love to get Jerry on a show.
Yeah, Jerry's very shy and quiet, but he's another interesting cat, Jerry, for sure. And we'll talk more about Jerry on our next show. Let's see. Yeah, I think we pretty much got everybody covered in here. Thanks everybody for chipping in there and watching and with the great comments. I think that's about it.
Awesome.
Adam
All right,
Roach,
guys.
Adam Roach, and of course Simon popped in before.
Oh yeah. Our
Yeah,
brother
the
from
lawnmower
Melbourne.
tapes. Let's see. We got everybody. Turd Ferguson, yeah, everybody check out his great videos and the great Andy Carson too. We can't forget Andy.
Oh,
I think that's it. Yeah, that's
awesome.
it.
All right, guys. We'll catch you later. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe and subscribe to our friends as well, please. It's really important that you do that. And there's yeah. So put Bohesifa. There he is. That's the original. Hank
Yeah.
Williams Jr.
And Nelson Rodriguez, I hope you're out of the garage.
All right. Don't go anywhere, Kyle. We're going to play the last video and then we'll end the show. But please don't drop out. Hang around, okay? Cheers.
I'm here.
All right, guys.